And we are back with another Black with No Cream podcast. New episode every single Wednesday and Sunday. I am your host, Ben Haggerty, aka Ben Real vs. World. I want to make an apology for this episode real quick. During the recording of this interview, my audio recorder shut off about like 35 minutes into the episode, which corrupted the audio. It totally sucked. I hit up the company to see if there's any way to save the media. They assured me that there was no way to save the media. I did some of my own digging on YouTube and found a workaround, which got some of the audio back, but the quality is definitely trash, so I'm sorry for the crunchy audio sound. It does get much better after 35 minutes, so don't worry, it's better, but fuck Zoom, because they didn't help me at all. I had to do it myself. What the hell is that? But I still love your gear, so if you guys want to sponsor me, do it. Okay, so this is a very cool interview for me to share with all of you today, as I'm interviewing the very talented Morley, who has been a family friend since I was pretty much born. But Morley is an incredible street artist, also from my home state of Iowa. He specializes in wheat paste posters that have been shared all over the world, and they're very well received. He's released 2 books that are dope as fuck. I got both of them. Support your local artists. He has been in galleries all over the world. He previously was a filmmaker, so his knowledge in film is nuts. He's still editing today, and he's collaborated with major brands without selling himself out. He was also picked up and managed by that same dude that manages Banksy, so it's like, what the fuck? Morley has such a cool perspective on life and goes deep on every topic that we touched on. So definitely make sure and listen to this interview and soak up the game. This shit is great. I'm so happy we did this. So by the time that you are hearing this episode, we will have just completed our first Black with No Cream contest ever, like our first contest. We teamed up with Epidemic Sounds to challenge all the video creators in Black with No Cream to make a one-take video in just 48 hours. We were able to pull together some insane prizes for this one too, which is dope to me. We were able to get over $5,000 in prizes thanks to Epidemic, giving away things like a Sony a6300, shoots 4K video, portable hard drives, SD cards, merch, like Epidemic Sound subscriptions. So much gear was given away for this contest. I'm very excited to see how this contest goes and hope we can do more in the future. If you guys have any ideas for a contest that you think we should do as Black with No Cream, as a community, shoot us an email, blackwithnocream@gmail.com. I want to hear your thoughts. All right, there is no sponsors for this episode, and there hasn't ever been any sponsors for this podcast, so please make sure to check out our Black with No Cream merch store and cop something to show your support for the podcast and the creative community. We have a very cool collection of Keep Creating hoodies, which I'm wearing right now, and those will only be available for a limited time, so definitely get those. We have shirts, long sleeves, mugs, hats. Look at this mug. This thing looks amazing if you're watching this on YouTube. Definitely go and pick something up at shopbwnc.com. Also, if you support Black with No Cream on Patreon, you will also receive an exclusive discount code on the merch. If you want to look into our Patreon account and all the perks that we offer on that account, go to patreon.com/blackwithnocream. Appreciate you. If this is your first time tuning in the Black with No Cream podcast, you're probably wondering, what does Black with No Cream stand for? Black with No Cream is a private content creator group fueled by caffeine, or at least I take my coffee Black with No Cream, but you can drink or not drink any caffeine you fuck with and still be a part of our community. We are a free private group on Facebook open to creators of all kinds, aka if you make videos, if you're a photographer, if you do marketing, management, editing, dancing, etc., etc., etc. All creators are welcome. Our private group has been growing rapidly. We have a shit ton of members. They're working together. They're sharing content. They're asking for feedback. They're passing tips and tricks along to one another with the goal of pushing each other to become the best motherfucking content creators on earth. And you can join our group if you want to by going to bwnc.com/join. We would love to fucking have you. Please join the group. All right, that's it. Enjoy the work week. Keep creating. Make sure to tune in every Wednesday and Sunday for a new Black with No Cream episode. And without further ado, I bring to you my interview with Morley in the most epic podcast intro ever created right motherfucking now.
Attention.
If you stop this podcast recording at any time,
you will die.
I don't want to die.
Do you want to live?
You have 24 hours to share this podcast with 5 people or you will die.
I'm kidding, you won't die. You're just weak shit for not sharing.
And the winner of the best motherfucking podcast goes to...
Black with No Cream.
What do you think?
It's so fucking dumb and so fucking Ben Haggerty.
I knew you would say that. And we're back. Another Black with No Cream podcast. How you doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
Good. I don't know. So you go by Morley, and I don't want to say your name because I don't know what you're. if people are looking for you.
Yeah, Morley is sort of. It's my middle name, and I sort of use it as a shield. So everybody always asks, like, how do you stay not arrested? And
right.
And part of that is usually just kind of keeping a very a little bit of a distance from anybody being able to ID me too easily.
Is that hard to do? Like with the internet?
It is.
Old
hard
videos and old things that you've done in the past. Like, is it hard to pull that off?
It is, but you'd be surprised, I think, because of the fact that now the internet is sort of so vast that like things can get lost a little bit more. I'm sure that if the policemen and women were super detectives, they could probably find me without too much trouble. But for me, I rely a little bit on apathy and kind of just letting things slide a little bit.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, I've heard of artists getting arrested at their gallery openings and things like that. And
that's crazy.
I try not to do anything that will make anybody too mad, but
right.
But I also, for example, when I've gotten stopped in the past by the police, I'll take my stuff down as quickly as possible so that they don't sort of say, wait a minute, I've definitely seen a lot more of this stuff up, and I can be like, oh, this is the first time I've ever done this,
right,
Mr. Policeman.
You need like an emergency spray paint can that you can just spray. You'd rather get the tagging fine or whatever.
Yeah, I'm Shepard Fairey.
Or
something, I don't know, something else.
So you're an amazing artist, my friend.
Thank you.
And we go back very, very long ways.
So long.
Super long ways.
Yeah.
It's crazy. For people who don't know much about you, give them like the quick Wikipedia summary.
Wikipedia summary.
You on Wikipedia?
I think so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Right.
Although
congrats.
Who knows what's on there now?
Yeah.
I am I'm an artist, a street artist based in LA, originally from Iowa, but my style basically is wheat pasted posters that are very typographic and have messages and slogans and aphorisms and things of that nature that I'm hoping are going to be sort of positive contributions to anybody who walks by them, be they humorous or poetic or an attempt at wisdom or encouragement. All of those things. I think I'm always hoping that a person that's coming off a long shift or another sort of a crappy audition or whatever will walk by it and get something from it, hopefully.
Right. I feel like you're doing a good job at it because you're still doing it, and
Thanks.
You've got some success on the internet, and you have books.
I do. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
I put it on the table because I just got it. I just got it like not too long ago.
Nice. Yeah.
I got worried that it wasn't coming.
Yeah. There was a shortage. I was reading somewhere about there being a shortage of paper because of, well, one, I think there's some tariff issues, which is weird, but from a lot of printers that are in China. And then I heard there was a weird paper shortage because there was a few books that did surprisingly well. Like Michelle Obama's book did really well.
Yeah.
Obviously people expected it to do well, but not quite as well as it did.
Right.
And so I think a lot of publishers had to sort of slow their roll a little bit on like releases and stuff like that. So it got pushed a little bit, but I'm glad to see that it's out and that it's, because for me, I don't know about you, but anything I do, I'm always convinced there's even the last second that it could be like, we've decided not to put it out type of thing. So the second I'm holding it is the second that it actually feels
it's
real.
Done. Yeah.
But until then it's like, oh no, someone, the movie theater could shut down and be like, we're not showing this type of thing. Like there's never a chance that it can't somehow go wrong.
Yeah. A lot of things I feel like book shelved. What was that?
Shelved.
Yeah,
sure.
Shelved. It gets shelved often. And that is frightening. And I feel like I also feel like the same way with any job. I mean, filming a job, you until you're on set or until the check comes in. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like, oh, cool. That job was real. I got paid from 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
So starting back childhood wise, how much do you like to dip into that, trying to keep your identity separate?
As long as I'm not sort of IDing myself too intensely, I'm pretty open about my childhood and about anything in my history,
film projects and things like that. If we mention titles of those, is that like getting too easy to find you? I don't know, because I feel like all these things add up to why you are who you are today.
I mean, we can talk about just random stuff that I've done, but maybe stay away from exact titles just so that we don't get too close for comfort. But
I'm cool with that.
Yeah, but as far as where I came from,
well, we can. I was just saying later on, from the things that you worked on getting through after college to here at those things in particular. But earlier on, so the way we know each other is interesting, which I've known you since, shit.
I want to say you're 3 years old when I met you.
It could have been that long. 3 years old. Damn, that's some OG friendship. Your mom was dating my uncle, and so you would always be around our family. So every time people were always like, "Oh, more, check out this piece," I'm like, "That's pretty much my cousin." So I tell everyone that. Yeah. So like,
for sure.
We go back all the way since then, and I just remember you having a heavy presence with G.I. Joes and things like that back in the day. But no, talk about your childhood.
So I grew up originally born in Iowa, and then my parents got divorced when I was pretty young, and we moved around. My mom and my sister and I, we first moved to San Francisco for a little bit, and then Washington, where I met your uncle, and then all of us moved back to Iowa. And so I spent most of I pretty much, even though I spent some years in other places, I feel like I'm kind of an Iowa kid through and through. All of my sort of primary memories kind of begin in Iowa. And I feel like it's really where I kind of came of age, and every kind of, defining characteristic of me was based, has some sort of, through line with that. And, growing up in Iowa, I was always kind of, there was that sense of feeling like the ceiling was pretty low, I was fortunate, it's funny because a lot of people, I think, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, when you tell them you're from Iowa, they get a very specific kind of picture in their mind, which is not always accurate,
always.
Right.
They think Idaho and Ohio.
Exactly. Yeah. They just think like sweeping fields of corn.
Yeah.
And the truth of it is that it's not exactly that, but it's also, for a lot of friends that I have, like they might have grown up in the suburbs, but it was like, it was a 45-minute drive to like a major city. And for me, it was like Chicago was the closest you'd come to like a real city, kind of thing. And that was like 4 hours away. So you're pretty far from like what the sort of the real hubs of places, But I did grow up in a university town in Iowa City. And so there was still like, it was a literate town. It wasn't like, Hicks or anything like that. But there still felt like anything that you do, or, if you rise to the top of your game at something, in Iowa, you're going to sort of reach that top pretty quickly. So you sort of, in my mind, and I think as most sort of young, arrogant people do, they kind of think like, I need more room to grow than this town can sort of provide me. Especially, if you, feel like you're, Mr. Cool or Mr. whatever. And, I probably as a kid thought, had a very healthy confidence in that regard, and probably a slight amount of misplaced arrogance as well. But I think that's also the kind of thing that motivates a person, like I think that any person who, moves to New York, which is what I did when I graduated high school, you kind of need that little spirit inside your head that's saying like, I deserve to be making this trip. I deserve to be, to be out here. And then I moved to New York, with aspirations to be a filmmaker. That was the primary goal in my mind, because, specifically screenwriting was what was the most exciting aspects. I grew up in the era of, independent movies like, Sundance and Miramax and things like that. And so for me, movies like Pulp Fiction were that was like a mainstream successful like film. Like you think of that as being like, that's the kind of movies that can get made, that's the regular kind of thing. And then for me at least, I sort of felt like I arrived to the scene just right after the kind of that era had ended, and all of a sudden now it's not, independent films aren't necessarily as exciting to the culture anymore, and you kind of, it felt a little bit like arriving, in Seattle, like, 6 months after Kurt Cobain killed himself type of thing, where you're like, oh, the party's kind of over.
Yeah, for sure.
So I went to school at a place called the School of Visual Arts. And while I was there, it was really exciting because I was meeting all these different people, and they were all very inspiring, and they all did, you know, like the school I went there as a film major, but I met, you know, photographers, and I met illustrators, and I met dancers, you know, and fashion people at FIT that was nearby. And, you know, I met all of these different, you know, people that were doing all these different things. And it really opened my mind up to all the different ways that you can express yourself, and that you're kind of not as limited as it seemed to be. You know, and so I started noticing a lot more different kinds of artwork. And I noticed in New York that there was all this wonderful, you know, thing that was introduced to me as street art. And I thought, wait a second. So, you know, the idea, you're creating something and it actually gets to live out its destiny without it being like, you know, like with a screenplay, you know, you write the screenplay, you try and get, you know, financing, you try and get actors, you try and, you know, get it, you know, made, and then you try and get distributors, then you try and get it into a movie theater, and then you're trying to get people to show up to that movie theater.
Right.
And there's all those different layers of permission that are required before you actually even get to sort of like see your creation get to live out what it was meant to do, you know?
If even, like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, as a person who sort of had become used to, you know, drawing up blueprints for buildings that never got made, kind of, I started really appreciating the fact that there was a way of expressing yourself without it having to go through all those different layers, and saying it's not a flyer for your band's show, it is the band's show type of thing. You know? And so I started sort of playing around in New York and doing little things. And
this is while you were in school?
This is while I was in school.
Oh,
yeah.
cool.
So I had taken a silk screening class. And one of the things that I started doing was silk screening these different ideas, messages, and little quotes and things I would come up with, or quotes that were from other people that I liked, and just screen printing them onto the contact paper, which is like that stuff you line like kitchen shelves with and things like that. And
the silk printing, is that the same thing that you would use to print on shirts? Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And so
it's like squeegee.
Exactly. Yeah. So I could make like, you know, a bunch of different messages onto, you know, big rolls of sticker paper, essentially, and put them up around the subways and stuff like that. And sort of for me, it was really exciting because I could just sit there after putting it up, I could sit there and then I could watch someone walk by and maybe notice it and kind of like be like, huh. And they can realize like, wow, it
just worked.
It just worked. Exactly. Yeah. It's funny because I think that like the very first experience I ever had with street art was, I had written like a short story, and there was a bank that was near my dorm, and it had one of those little like ATM rooms where you kind of like go into the room and it's just ATMs, and it's not quite the bank proper. But so I went into that room and left my story next to like the deposit envelopes, and just kind of like
just on paper,
printed on paper, and then sat and pretended to be like, you know, using the ATM. And then the next person came in and kind of, you know, was, you know, looked around, and then they see this little story, and they kind of picked it up, and they sort of started reading it, and then they kind of just see them sort of like fold it up and put it in their pocket and leave, because they thought they just found something that someone had just like forgotten or whatever. Oh wow. And for me, I was just like, I finally found an audience.
Yeah, that's insane. One of one. Yeah, that's crazy.
Exactly. And so it sort of that experience gave me an understanding of the value of both a large variety of people seeing something, in the terms of like the people that would see something on the subway, and then also the value of one person seeing something, you know, that one person that got the story and took it home, you know. So for me, it's like, I'm always kind of trying to create art that kind of meets the sweet spot between those two, you know, audiences, the one person and then the broad, you know, general audience, you know.
I had a friend that was on the podcast, two things actually. When I was, I would do something similar, or I enjoyed the same feeling when I would go to like the Apple store, and I would just go on a couple of the computers and pull up one of my recent videos and just leave it there and then walk away, and people would walk up and see it, and then probably just like X out real quick and start seeing like the RAM or something.
Totally. I think that to me, it's like, I think that's one of the sort of telltale signs of a real artist, is when there's the joy in not necessarily being celebrated for something, but just knowing that your expression is being ingested in some way. You know, like, I think that, you know, I meet a lot of people who you can tell pretty quickly what their motivation is because of the fact that they're sort of like, yeah, but if it's not going to be huge, what's the point?
Right.
You know? And it's kind of like, well, the point is one, you know, the creation of something, just to literally like it didn't exist before and now it does exist, you know? And then the second, I think, is the edification you can hopefully bring somebody else, but also that you can bring to yourself in the sense of like, who are you on the other side of making this? Right. What have you learned? You know, have you gained anything as far as experience, as far as wisdom, as far as a better understanding of yourself, you know, like,
and that's the real world experience that they try to teach you in school, that you're going to go out and get the real world experience.
Totally.
Like that's it. Even testing things that might not hit, like the viral campaigns that you want to get on YouTube or something, like it still exists in multiple formats.
Yeah.
But my friend had always said, and I think this parallel to what you said. So he was on the podcast, Travis Lloyd. He's a public speaker from Iowa. He's from Des Moines.
Nice.
And he focuses on foster care and all things like that. But he had his part of his speech, because I would travel with him when he would speak and I would make like little videos for him, was it's just one person. That's like one of his biggest phrases. And it goes back to like, for him, it was one person in school that gave him the mindset that he wasn't just a piece of shit foster kid, that he could excel in many things. And for you, it's the same thing. So I'm sure that you've probably gotten emails or some sort of message about someone suicidal or someone that this thing completely changed their day or mindset through just that, which is, to me, it's bigger than trying to do some rapid campaign that might not ever really resonate with anyone, because it's just something that people are watching on their phones and silent while they're at work and it doesn't make sense or whatever. So I guess did that become kind of part of your mission? Absolutely.
You know, and I think, you know, it's funny because I move out to LA after being in New York, and, you know, still chasing the dream of being a screenwriter and making projects and having, you know, small amounts of success, but, you know, enough to sort of keep me going. But really getting frustrated by the amount of money and time, and also, you know, the difficulty in finding collaborators too. That can be a challenge too, in terms of just finding the right team of people that you can work with, you know, and also just wanting to kind of create something where it could be all on my own and create something. You know, it's funny because I've done music over the years, and it's always, you know, there's the magic of playing with a band and being like, you know, getting the joy of that, which I know you've experienced. Yeah. But then there's also the kind of, you know, different experience you have when you spend all night just like sort of working on something by yourself, you know, layering it on by yourself and sort of, you know, like, you know, putting, you know, all the sort of different, you know, little tweaks on it yourself. And then at the end sort of saying, wow, so this is all me, you know, unadulterated, sort of like no filter, you know, I think that there's things to gain from collaboration. Of course, there's also things to gain, I think, from like, you know, the 10,000 hours spending, you know, by yourself sitting, you know, with a laptop or an acoustic guitar or whatever. And so I sort of, you know, I wanted to have a kind of side project that was something that I could just do myself, that I could do and get some small amount of joy out of. And so, you know, that was when I started developing this idea of like, well, what if I created messages that would encourage people like me? Like, I'm frustrated, I get disappointed and let down by, you know, things that I'd hoped to, you know, would be more successful, whatever. You know, and I realized I lived now in a city, Los Angeles, that's just full of frustrated dreamers, you know, and they're not always, some of them are people that moved out here to be, you know, to try and, you know, to achieve some goal, but, or some of them are people that have come out here, achieved the goal and found that they're still not, they don't feel complete. Some of them are people that are from here and, you know, challenged by just the economy and the, you know, and, you know, some of them are immigrants from different, you know, countries that have come here sort of chasing a dream that's, you know, less, you know, glitzy and glamorous than being a rock star, but are chasing, you know, just as hard and if not harder than anybody else. And so, you know, for me, I thought, I want to try and speak to these people. I want to try and leave messages behind that can, you know, hopefully make their day just a little bit brighter. So I started creating this stuff. And then when I was, you know, utilizing, I thought, well, I'm not really like a talented illustrator necessarily. I'm not really a talented artist in these ways that, you know, the people that I knew from school were. But I do feel like maybe I have some skills as a writer that I could utilize. And I thought, you know, but is that good enough? You know, and I thought, well, maybe it's the one thing that can define me. Maybe the thing that I feel like, you know, maybe I can be like the guy who kind of does like the text stuff, you know, I'm the typography guy,
right.
you know, and obviously there are other street artists that have used, you know, words and stuff like that. But I thought, you know, instead of seeing it as being a failure or a flaw on my part, maybe lean into it and like let it be the kind of thing that can be my sort of flag that I fly and say, no, this is what defines me. And so then with that came also this desire of, well, obviously street artists are all sort of anonymous and or create a sort of mythology, you know, this sort of Banksy kind of Robin Hood type of urban folklore hero,
right? Which
I just thought I don't think that would be sincere for me. I don't think that I could be something I could pull off. I don't think I'm cool enough. I don't think I'm. But in a similar way, I thought, you know, well, what if I'm not trying to be cool? What if I'm not trying to create this sort of cool character? What if I'm just as honest in me as I actually am? So I thought, you know, instead of it being a brand or a logo or something that people would say, oh, I always see that, you know, that character, I thought it should be me.
Right.
It should be a drawing of me leaving these messages for people, so that they can say that's coming from a person, that's coming from someone that I can view as a friend or a sort of another, you know, comrade in arms. And so that was sort of the, you know, initial germination of the idea. And then I thought I need to kind of go beyond stickers because LA doesn't have kind of the mass transit system that New York has.
You were still doing that same style from New York to here.
Yeah. Or you know, I was thinking like, you know, how, you know, at this point I was like, how can I evolve that style into something that would work better in LA? Right. And so that's when I started using the wheat paste posters because, you know, it was something that, you know, people like Shepard Fairey, you know, and have used, and there's a lot of other street artists. I mean, some people think it's sort of the street artists, you know, the cheating method or whatever. But for me, it created a way of making, you know, I can have 50 posters in my car. Right. You know, a lot of people that use like stencils and things like that. It takes a lot longer to cut a stencil than it does to print out a poster. And so I can create a poster. I can have a bunch of different posters. And if I find the right context for that message, you know, because I don't want to create a message that feels completely out of the environment that it's put up in. You know, why would I put like a message about materialism in Compton, and why would I put a message about, you know, striving through adversity in Beverly Hills type of thing?
Exactly.
So I sort of started there, and it really genuinely was not thought of with, you know, through a business lens. You know, if I had thought of it as a sort of a business, I think I might have been a little bit more shrewd, because it's just too easy, I think, to you know, to create, you know, like, why would I necessarily think that someone would want to hang on their wall a picture of me? You know what I mean?
I have you on my wall, man.
You do. But I think like it took me a long time for
I got you at my coffee table. I got you.
You know, it's funny. It's because it's like, I realized that one of the challenges about, like, if I was to try and sell my art, which, you know, I thankfully do. And it's always baffling to me, but I'm always really grateful for it. It's like, if I was to try and describe to you what a painting by like Picasso looked like, I could sort of maybe explain it to you in a way that you could sort of picture in your mind, but you're not experiencing the art. Right. If I just remember the message that I saw while I was passing it on the street and tell you, you've pretty much experienced the art, right. You know? So that means that it's a lot more kind of temporal and a lot more sort of, it's not as vital, but at the same time, I think that's, you know, that's the way that our culture is these days. You walk by something and you don't necessarily need to stop and say, I need to burn this into my memory. But sometimes it's just like, you see a message and you feel like, oh, wow, that's actually relates to something that I'm going through and something that's relevant to me in this way or that way. And it kind of requires the average person that passes to kind of implant their own DNA, you know, and sort of say, this relates to me because of these things that I'm going through. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about finding that sweet spot between being general and being specific. If you can create something that feels like that most people that pass it can say, this, I can relate to this. But at the same time, you want each of those people to say, wow, this feels so intimately for me because of what I'm going through. So
coming from a relatable source too, like the way you're creating these posters, it's you just looking very relatable. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
hopefully, yeah.
Just another dude in the streets. Like that makes sense to me.
I don't draw, an awesome, set of abs on myself, which is...
We should start wearing like Gucci.
Yeah, right. I should just I should make myself look like the Maroon 5 singer with all the tattoos.
Yeah.
And,
to start doing you without the
peeling
shirt.
off my shirt. Yeah, exactly.
When I posted that I was having you on in our community, I just shared one of your posters, and the one that I shared was that it says, even though I asked you what you thought, I really just wanted compliments.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone in our community faces that, which is tough because even though people have their opinions, all you really do want is like some applause for your work.
Right.
Even if it's not there yet, it's still something you're in for. But I thought that was going to be very relatable for everyone in the community.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. You want to create something. For me, at least, I always want to create something that enough people can relate to, but also can say, I haven't necessarily articulated it because it's not something I'm super proud of, or it's not something that I feel, I want to sort of admit about myself, type of a thing. And it's amazing to me how much, I think, that's sort of a silly one, but at the same time, I think there's an important message in that. And that sometimes like people do kind of just need, empowerment, and so it's funny how often, when people will show me like artwork or whatever that they've done, I never feel it's my obligation to really give sincere criticism. I think it's great, when people can find the people that are sort of like can really mentor them. But for me, it's like, man, this world is so full of people who will just say no to you, that it's like, every time I've ever like read a friend's screenplay or whatever, I'm always like, okay, I'm going to say everything that I think is great about it. And unless there's something that I feel like is fundamental that I can kind of, help steer them with, if it's like a small, thing of like, this kind of didn't really work, or this, I think this character didn't feel relatable, I might keep that to myself just because it seems like, what are you actually gaining by, it's sort of, figuring out the value of a criticism and then the value of applause.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like it's always great to lead off anytime someone's asking for a critique with anything positive at first. Like, please come with positivity. Otherwise it's just they're never gonna absorb it the way they even wanted to in the first place. They may be willing to take the hit if someone's gonna give it to them, but I understand that completely. So during the process of you started this kind of like when you moved to LA. When did you move to LA?
2006 is when it kind of became Morley.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
2006 to around 2010 was when I was sort of germinating, and then I sort of started doing stuff more like aggressively around 2010.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So during that time, because I love the idea of you going to film school and doing all that to learn screenwriting and everything that you were doing and applying that out here. And I understand the frustration of getting things off the ground, because I know that that's very challenging. There's a YouTuber that, I don't know if you know Casey Neistat. Have you heard of this guy?
I haven't, no.
He's like the guy that created vlogging. Okay. Basically that type of creating content. But his story is similar in the way where he had a show with his brother on HBO that he like starred in, wrote, directed, did everything.
What was the show?
I can't, the Neistat brothers, maybe. I can't remember the title of the show, but it's about him and his brother. His brother's, I don't think, very famous, but Casey's like did it on YouTube. He's like the first guy to invent that style of shooting and whatever. But the reason why he started that was because of his frustration doing the Hollywood route of creating. Right. And he said it took him 3 years to make that show come to life. And with that frustration, he decided, all right, well, what if I make a movie like my movies that are 9-10 minutes long for YouTube? And he would go out and explore somewhere and create something. And the idea of just being able to create it and hit upload, and if people see it, cool. If not, at least it's out. Yeah, is the same idea with this, which I feel like is really unique. And same with me with the podcast. Like just the fact that we can sit down and record and I could share that. I don't know, even if the numbers are low to start with and they stay low, sure, it doesn't matter. I think it hits people the right way, which is the whole point. Well, I think it's the beginning of ingenuity in a lot of ways. You know, I think it's you look at, I mean, I think podcasting in general, I think, you look at all the sort of biggest podcasts and they almost all sort of started out of, people being frustrated with the fact that they, were sort of felt like they were shouting into the ether, and they thought, well, might as well start recording some of the shouting. Yeah. And maybe the ether can be populated by people somehow. I mean, you look at like WTF and things like that.
there, you know, I mean, and it's funny because I think it relates back to my, you know, upbringing with the independent film, you know, sort of movement, and thinking like, I remember, you know, for me watching a movie like Clerks or Reservoir Dogs when I was a kid, you know, or El Mariachi or any of the sort of classic 90s independent, you know, movies. It to me was like, wow, so this guy just got together some money and just like shot it, and like people were hungry for that, you know, and you know, I think it's the frustrating thing is when you sort of realize like, oh, you're sort of you've come too late to the show, and you realize like it's overwhelmed with people that are all clamoring to kind of like get something, you know, and so then it's like I think it's usually in those moments you're like you kind of tilt your gaze a little bit and find something new, and you're like, wow, well, this hasn't been sort of exploited too much. This is a different way, you know, a kind of a new method that hasn't, you know, necessarily been overwhelmed by people jockeying sort of for position. And I think that for me, that was one of the things that was really enticing about street art, was that I could create something and there wasn't necessarily like 10,000 other people that it could kind of just get lost in, you know. And what's interesting is, you know, street art has had kind of its moment in the sun, and that moment has faded a little bit. You know, there was a sort of moment, I think, when it became like the sort of flavor of the month, and LA was sort of, there was a lot more street art, you know, everywhere you look, you'd see a different artist that was, you know, doing stuff, which was both exciting and also kind of frustrating because it sort of diluted the talent pool a little bit. And you'd also get a lot of people that were in it, you know, I think very temporarily because they thought, oh, well, wait a second, if I don't get a gallery show in 2 months, then what's the point? You know, type of thing, which I think you see in the podcast world. You see in a lot of these different sort of, you know, methods of expression that as soon as sort of someone, you know, lights a fire, everyone sort of runs to it. And then it becomes this kind of thing of like, well, who can, you know, sort of have a voice that stands out a little bit. So for me, I think it's, you know, I kind of started rambling there, but I think are you saying this that it's toned down now? I think it's toned down now. I think you know, for different reasons. I think it's toned down because I think that fewer celebrities are sort of into it. I think it's toned down because maybe the sort of super rich art people that were spending a lot of money and probably too much money on a lot of art, you know, weren't seeing their investments returned necessarily. And I think also it just became kind of the culture sort of got used to the idea, and all of a sudden they weren't, you know, a street art wasn't just automatically kind of like a cool outlaw type of a thing. It sort of feels like, you know, maybe like gangster rap in the 90s, where it's sort of like, it's got this kind of aura to it that people are drawn to. And then once that kind of becomes commonplace, all of a sudden it's sort of, you go from, you know, Straight Outta Compton to Ja Rule or something. Right. You know? Yeah, exactly. Firefest. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like, especially Netflix absorbing and creating, I'm trying to like exit through the gift shop and things that became mainstream, like something that would pop on to me in Iowa at the time. Why is it showing up in my feed? But then all of a sudden I'm learning about this culture and then this guy and then Banksy, and you hear all these stories and it is very like, cause it's anonymous and there's all these secrets, and especially with Banksy, because it's just such a, you know, I mean, the first one to like really pop at like superstar level. Yeah. And I think it's also like he became so sort of, his ideas were so interesting, you know, and I think that people were suddenly realizing not only the idea of like, oh, he's not only is he coming up with clever sort of little pieces of art, but he's putting them in places that makes the environment part of the art, you know, which I think is one of the best things about street art, that, you know, a building is dilapidated and falling apart, you put a piece of art in it, and all of a sudden it's like, it's not just that little area that the art is. Now it's everything that is within that sort of frame is suddenly part of the art. And I think that's, you know, a way of sort of reclaiming spaces, and it's a way of you know, utilizing your, you know, the world that you live in. And I think that it makes people sort of, it transforms the space to a lot of people. Yeah, that makes sense. Someone should go light it up over here at this empty Target building on Sunset. Have you seen that? I've been obsessed with this ghost Target for so long. Isn't it weird? It's so weird. I don't understand. They must at some point, the amount of money that has been spent to halfway build it.
And the lights are always on, like just to keep it lit. Like what the fuck? There's so people don't understand. There's right by my house. There's a Target building that they started building, but I guess the city said that. Yeah. So sorry, I just fucked up. I didn't, batteries.
We can just jump back in like nothing ever happened and just say like, so you were explaining what Ghost Target was.
Oh yeah, Ghost Target. Yeah, so sorry, Ghost Target's right over here on Sunset. Right by, have you had the taco truck there?
I have, yeah.
Do you get the burritos ever?
I haven't gotten the burritos there. I've been a vegetarian now for not too long, but I have had I've in the past had them, and they're fantastic.
So they must fund the Ghost Target because this Ghost Target's just sat in this lot with its lights on every night, and I don't understand it. And they just haven't completed building it, and it's just sitting there. It's a massive building, massive project.
I'm always blown away by everything that costs tremendous amounts of money if there's not a guarantee that they'll recoup that money. Because to me, it's like you think about the devastating, like movies that cost $200 million that don't make their money back, and you think like not only could you obviously do wonderful things like feed homeless people and all that stuff with $200 million, but even just like you could also have made $200 million movies that could have made at least
so
their
much
money.
It's so much impact.
I never understand the idea of
like Target probably doesn't even know that building's there right now, like it's just sat there for so much time that you just it
just becomes a write-off or something,
Okay, so now that we just did our
covered,
little Target,
exactly.
Now that you guys know what's going on over here in Target and East Hollywood or wherever I'm at, so for me, coming up in this stuff, which is interesting because I just want to tie in how like our relationship. I remember because we knew each other as kids, but then you left obviously, and then going on as I started getting into high school and I was playing music and stuff and got into playing with my cameras, it was more like snowboard, skate videos and things like that. But I started getting into, being a little bit more artistic with it. And Dan, my uncle, had told me to check out your stuff that you've been doing because he just keeps tabs. He's a king of keeping tabs. Sure. And you were, I think maybe you were still in, maybe you just got done with film school, maybe you're out in LA already, and you were making like shorts and different things like that and working on like a feature. And I remember watching that, and that shit changed everything for me because I'm just like, wow, it can, because you were from here, right? You're from Iowa, and it could be done. You know what I mean? Like you had done it. And at the time I was trying to decide, do I go to film school? And I reached out to you. I don't know if you remember this, but I don't know what platform it was on, MySpace or something, but I had messaged you and was like, yo, I'm considering this, like, what do you think? And like your biggest takeaway, and I still tell everyone this whenever we talk about film school, is like, from my only experience is like, I have a friend that went and enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And I have 2 people that have done it. And then I have a lot of people that haven't. And I just know the people that have done it told me the reasons that were positive walking out of it. And yours was that it's going to cost a lot of money, but the best thing is you never know like who your peers are going to be. You could be going to school with like the next Spielberg. You just don't know that until, so it's the king of networking. Like you're paying to have the best network. And then obviously the opportunities that come with like being in that space and using that stuff. But that made such a big impact on me. And then I just didn't do it because it was like so much money.
Well, I think it's always a different world. And I think there's so many different things to gain until, and I think that, for me, I think I was surprised how I knew a lot of kids in film school who graduated and thought like, what a waste of time that was. And it was like, yeah, but you made it a waste of time.
Yeah, totally.
You didn't utilize it the same way. And I think that, for a lot of people, you can make, anything you can make your film school be whatever if you're hustling and you're doing everything you can do and you're making those connections and you're doing everything you like, I think then that you're gaining the same experience, you're gaining the same, like there's people that go to film school and because they don't make it a priority, they don't leave having shot anything.
Right.
They don't leave having, done more than a few bong hits and partied or whatever, and I think that, I was always blown away when I would go to like my film school had like a film library, and I felt like I was the only one that ever went to it and ever like checked out all these different movies and watched them, and I think that like, you can't, there's definitely no method of education where it's just sort of plugged in like the Matrix, or you're just like, I know Kung Fu now,
Right.
everything. Like, you're never going to experience something like that in this world. So it really is up to you to get that, education. And I think that's why, however is the best way of experiencing that. And I think then the only difference beyond that, beyond a person who's like, Will Hunting from Good Will Hunting, who can read 1,000 books and really like get that knowledge, and a person who goes to, a big expensive school, is the people that you will meet. And I think that, if you're, trying to be an English major, it might not necessarily matter as much the people that you're going to meet. But if you're going to get into a collaborative art form like filmmaking, it's really important to meet good people and to
Right.
somehow connect to those people. And I think you're the kind of person that is, naturally, drawn to socializing and to finding the right, the people, and saying, okay, this is a talented guy. I want to, meet him and talk to him and get to glean as much information as I can off of him. And then, maybe collaborate with him on something kind of thing. And those relationships, I think, come really easy to you. I think some people, don't necessarily have that skill as much.
Totally.
And so college is an easier sort of place for that socialization to kind of naturally happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt like choosing not to go to, because I was going to go to the Art Institute in Colorado, and choosing to not go there because it was like an obnoxious, for some reason it was like over $100,000 for the school, 2-year program or something. And my parents were like, we support you, but you have to understand you're going to be paying for this for fucking ever. Like, you need to know that. And I just at the time I wanted to go film snowboarding movies, just make snowboarding movies.
Sure.
And so I didn't go, and I ended up going to my community college and then went to my university and took it was just a communications degree with like an emphasis on electronic media. It was super bullshit. And being there, I met the people that were going through the process to just, be the Matrix and just like learn how to do. And it was basically like setting you up to go to news, to do news, you know what I mean? To learn how to do news broadcasts. And I found the right people in my squad that wanted to do more, that wanted to be more creative, that were, we had the opportunity to do that. And so we would take the gear and we'd go shoot, and we'd try all these things, and it was trash. Like, what we were making was trash. It was never good, but it was still the act of being active that was so fulfilling. And that just, having that immediate find to know that this isn't really where I want to be, but there's people that are also in that same situation. Like, we could go and try to be creative elsewhere. That means that it can exist everywhere. And then all you have to do is just have the knowledge to know that, cool, if I leave here and go somewhere over here, this may be a little bit better, or be easier to find. It might not be easy, but it will be easier to find what I'm looking for than it is here, Right.
But I think the only thing that then is thrown into that mix is the sort of democratization of materials, in terms of like, the guy who wants to get into, filmmaking, for example. There's a lot of equipment that you can either, learn to use. I think that for you, like, it seemed like a big thing was finding equipment that you felt you could thrive with, using. And I think it was drone footage. The first was sort of your big first thing. Yeah. And I think that like that is fantastic for you. And I think that, you were able to sort of find that thing. And, it's always a challenge, I think, for people who don't necessarily have access to that kind of a thing. And I think it's great that we're getting into an era where that access is becoming so much more easier for people to get, like, you can get a crappy drone now. And sort of like, to me, it's sort of like, with art, I liken it to like being like a cook, and that, like, before you're going to become the best, you're going to be able to make the world's greatest scrambled eggs. You got to make a lot. You got to burn a lot of eggs. You got to make a lot of really bad meals, and a lot of really, and like you said with the films that you started making, like, they weren't necessarily great, but it's like every single time you made something, you got a little bit better, just a little bit better, And I think that that it's exciting that there are art forms now that I think that people can get better in without having it necessarily be something that is only accessible to people who have millions of dollars. And sometimes I think that comes from, like when I went to film school, that to me was like the only way that I knew how to get access to a film camera.
That was my theory on it as well. You know what I mean? To actually have the opportunity to play with those tools. And that's what I think the draw was to going to that school was, I remember taking a tour of that art institute in Colorado, and they're like, and this is our 8th floor with $1 million worth of film gear. And I'm like, oh my fucking God, $1 million. Yeah, it only takes a couple kids to go through this 2-year program for them to pay for $1 million worth of film gear. Like, and the draw of that was so cool to me, because I knew if I was in there, I would be touching it and utilizing it and checking it out every single day and shooting with it and trying to create. And now, years later, that stuff's completely never being used ever again, except for like some of the.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like as far as film school goes, like there's the two sort of methods of thought. Like I remember I went to NYU, and they were like, your first 3 years, you're going to do a lot of film theory. You're going to do a lot of more textbook stuff, and we're going to discuss things and analyze things more. And then your junior year, you'll start making stuff. And I was like, I can't wait that long. I'm going to be getting, I probably won't even finish school, because I'll be, making my first, feature film that'll become an Oscar nominated film after, sophomore year. So I need to go to the school that gives me access to these things to, right away. And so that was what drew me to the School of Visual Arts, was they were like, freshmen start shooting film, and so I was like, that's where I need to be.
Right.
And I think that's great, as long as you can sort of find the discipline to use the stuff and get better at it, and not, because I think you can also become frustrated by the fact that you're like, wow. I think a lot of street artists get frustrated by, they're like, wow, so I start creating stuff and it's not immediately setting the world on fire, or I don't feel like I'm, like that my style has kind of defined itself yet enough. Like, and I think, the other sort of trap that I think a lot of artists, of all, different genres and mediums fall into is, just looking like derivative of the stuff that they like, so it's like, every street artist has to try and like actively not look like Banksy, because it's just too easy to sort of aspire to that, and wind up looking like a crappy version of Banksy. It's just like every filmmaker these days, I'm sure, is like, whether it's somebody like David Fincher or it's like Christopher Nolan, or, in my day it was like Tarantino and things like that. And every sort of student film sort of was like a bad attempt at a Tarantino type of thing. And so I think that for me, it's like, finding that voice that you can find that's unique to you. Oftentimes I think those voices come from the things that you're embarrassed of, like I said before, with like the fact that I didn't feel like I was a better illustrator. All of a sudden, the thing that I sort of felt, insecure about could become the thing that defined me. And I think that's usually where a lot of times people will say like, I'm not the best at this, but somehow utilizing who I am is more unique than trying to be like Banksy, And so I think that's the other thing too, is I think that, in that sort of 10,000 hours of trying to find not only the ability to create the art you want to create, and sort of like, what's in your head, actually then see it, materialized. But I think you also within that time find a voice that you realize like, wow, I'm not trying to look like someone else now. Now I'm just trying to get me. I'm trying to express me in an honest and a sincere way. Yeah. I think people relate to that a lot more. People are engaged by that a lot more. You look at like, the punk music scene, and you realize like, yeah, it's not about technical wizardry. It's about expression and raw emotion and some sort of like, genuine, intimate, sincere, thing that people can relate to and appreciate. And I think all of a sudden you're like, wow, so this person doesn't necessarily, isn't a wizard on drums or whatever, but all of a sudden it's like the raw power behind it can somehow make up for that fact. And so I think that's one thing that's constantly sort of cycling and recycling and within, the different art form mediums is passion somehow trumping technical ability. Of course, that can go the other way too, where it's like, but there's nothing wrong with learning how to play a guitar. There's nothing wrong with like, in your case, like getting really good at, the with the equipment that you have, and helping it be, something that and also I think there's the the other level of it, which is professionalism, and realizing, okay, so I'm taking my technical ability, I'm taking the voice that I'm sort of learning artistically, I'm taking my skills as a person who can hustle and can negotiate and can learn to network with different people. And then there's also the thing of like, now I need to be able to like meet deadlines. Now I need to be able to like, if I'm having, like, for me, it's like if I'm having a gallery show, I need to be able to like have the art there on time and do that. And then it's, then there's the layer after that, which is now I need to like learn how to like work with people. I need to get paid from that. I need to make sure that gallery person isn't ripping me off, and that they're, that I need to make sure that, that this person who I'm buying canvas from is, I'm getting the best price from, whatever, right. So it's like negotiating and sort of juggling all of these different sort of, things. I think somewhere in there you suddenly realize like, wow, I'm actually doing this. This is actually like, I'm an artist. I'm, it's not just a hobby. It's not just a pipe dream. Yeah, you've taken it to a level that you're comfortable with, but it also makes sense for who you are. Right, which is what kind of happened for me. When I started creating street art, I definitely had no, notion of how I could even, monetize it, how I could turn it into something that was a business. I just started putting it up, and then people started responding to it in a way that was really encouraging for me, and pretty soon I got contacted by this company called The Outsiders, which was run by a guy named Steve Lazaridis, who was Banksy's manager and manages all these fantastic, primarily UK, but also just European artists, all of which were way, way, way above sort of my pay grade or ability, to sort of like, which was a really big, which was a really big intimidating factor when it happened, because it kind of happened for me relatively quickly, especially compared to a lot of other artists, which is at times become kind of a point of contention. There would be people that were like, oh, it kind of came too easy for Morley. He didn't spend 12 years creating art on the street without ever being noticed. He kind of created art, and like a couple of years in, he was already being, courted by these, this gallerist and this guy. And so, I, of course, I'll join their ranks in saying like, yeah, I don't know why it was, I think it was, again, this guy was just looking for sort of other street artists that seemed different. And seemed unique. Yeah. And so they reached out to me and they said, would you be interested in, working with us, and, we can make, help, make prints and stuff for you and do, so this is a gallery show. So you're saying it's two different people? It's the guy that managed Banksy and then another person? No, one person. Yeah. So his job would be to manage getting your content in galleries, manage getting your content printed and sold online or something? He had his own gallery. Oh. He sort of had started as a manager and kind of became then this like guy who, had galleries all over, London, but also would put on these, incredible shows. Like he did one show that was sort of, it became kind of known as like, he would create these things that were more events than shows. He did one that took place in like a sewer where you literally have to crawl down into an actual sewer, walk around, and you'd see the artwork on the walls in the sewer. And so every, person that would experience it, they, even beyond the art, they would be like, I had to crawl into a sewer, and so it's like the event and the experience of that sort of, I think a lot of his ideas in terms of promoting in that way were, worked perfect with street art, because so much of street art is about, kind of like the environment. And it's also about the, utilizing and sort of changing the way people look at the places they're in, and the environment that they're amongst. And so, so he basically, his company reached out to me and said, we'd love to put you, to start, selling some of your work and putting you into some of our galleries. And I was like, at first I was like, you're obviously joking, because there's no way. You knew who this was? I knew he was prior to them reaching out. So the equivalent of this for like an artist, like a musician, is this like getting hit up by Interscope, but you... It's a little different because I think it's kind of apples and oranges a little bit in terms of the comparison, only because I don't know if necessarily he would be Interscope. It's more like, being, if you're a band and being hit up by like Merge Records or like, I don't know, I'm trying like a really cool indie,
Right.
you know, where, and somewhat similar, like, you know, if they tried selling prints of my stuff and no one was interested, I think it would have kind of gone away pretty quick,
Right.
you know?
But it didn't.
It didn't quite. I mean, like I, you know, I'm not obviously as big as a lot of his, I'm not quite as big as many of his artists,
Yeah.
but I, when we worked together, it seemed like we were, you know, it was a good experience for both of us. And it was really cool. They flew me out to London and I, you know, and it was a really kind of a nice crash course because I got to meet a lot of really cool artists and they got to sort of tell me, you know, their experiences. And I got to, you know, and it was also, you know, while I was doing this, I was, you know, reading up about, you know, every artist that I could and sort of, you know, investing my, you know, as much, you know, research into the scene that I was in, you know,
Right.
because again, like even when I'd started, I hadn't really thought like I'll be a fixture in the street art scene. It just really was more like I'll put this up and maybe some people will like it, and that will be I'll get to sort of hit the release valve of creative expression, and then it can kind of keep me going until the next thing that that I can kind of create. So I didn't have any kind of no goals really with anything. To me, it was like it was baffling that anybody would want to buy anything, you know? And so when they initially reached out to me, I was also struck with just this immense like intimidation because I was like, I don't belong. My stuff is not as good as it doesn't even belong to be in the same, you know, roster or whatever. And, you know, one of my friends, Andrew, who, you know, he said, yeah, but you know, you look at the comic page in the newspaper, and you know, like Peanuts isn't necessarily the best drawn comic strip on that page, but it's unique in its own way, and it's found its own voice, and people are drawn to it because of the creator and what the creator is saying through his work. And so even though there's more technically well drawn comics, you know, on that page, like that doesn't mean there's not a place for Peanuts, you know, type of thing. And so that made me feel much better to be like, okay, so yeah, I'm not trying to be as good as like Stanley Donwood, who does all the Radiohead album covers, you know, or, you know, Jamie Hewlett, who just like does the Gorillaz artwork.
These are all the people that are on that roster.
Yeah,
Jesus
for sure.
Christ.
He works with all these people, you know.
God damn.
Yeah. And, you know, and again, you know, maybe it is similar to like a record label type of situation, because just because you get signed to Interscope doesn't necessarily mean that they even expect you to be on the same level as like other, you know, the top artists. But, you know, I definitely felt like I don't know how I'll be able to exist in this world because, you know, it felt like, oh, I must be a fraud because there's no good reason for me to even be, you know, amongst these people. And I think that, you know, it was a good experience for me, and it was really good learning experience, and it was good to sort of, you know, give me a little bit of a confidence to say, you know, to sort of stand up and say like, okay, this is my artwork, for better, for worse. Some people aren't going to like it. Some people hopefully are. This guy who seems to have a really good taste seems to like it enough to give it a chance. Yeah. So maybe I can kind of trust that. And I think that, you know, I think a lot of great artists, you know, wouldn't have been able to have the ability to be great if somebody hadn't really empowered them and said like, no, trust your confidence and say, I don't mind. This is going to sound like something Kanye West would say or something, but like, I don't mind being great. I'm not afraid of being great, which totally sounds like that's a Kanye thing.
But that's how you need, it's the same thing as what you're talking about being in high school. It's like, you still feel like you have to have a little bit inside of you to make you feel like you deserve to go be in those spaces. Like that's just how it is.
Right. Totally.
If you didn't have confidence like that, then you're never going to get something out. You'll never create the first piece. You'll never take the first step, you know?
What did you feel like when you first got the call? Because obviously, like with your career, it's, you know, you've been building slowly but surely. I mean, rapidly compared to, I'm sure a lot of people would say that your success has been very quick. But at the same time, you know, I imagine there probably was one or two jobs where you were probably like, oh, am I ready for this leap? You know?
Shit, I don't know. This is still crazy too. going back to when you and Andrew were working on your film, and I won't say the name of it, but they put out a feature, which was still, this is all shit that's inspiring me back home, because I'm seeing you put a full feature film together with people that I recognize, you know what I mean? Like actors that are real actors and shit, you know what I mean? And it was like done right. And it was funny. And and I remember watching that, and then coming out to LA. It was my first time coming to LA, I think. Yeah, it was my first time coming to LA, and my friend Jason lived in Long Beach. And so while I was out here, I hit you up because I knew you were out here. And I was like, hey, if you're ever free, coffee, we planned for it. I was going to come up, and you hit me up the night before, and you asked me to come help you out with the little sketch that you guys were doing for Funny or Die. Yeah. And so you said, come by tomorrow, we need some extra hands. That was even the point where I was like, oh shit. Really? Like, just because I didn't know. I've been talking about it and acting like I knew this shit and like trying to be in that world, but I just am a consumer. I hadn't done anything. So going on set and even getting there, and it was hilarious because you guys were shooting on like DV tapes and like trying to make it look old. So it didn't require that's real production. That I was like, huh. I'm like, shit, you could still make stuff. I'm like, what are they making? You know, until I see it at the end, and you're like, I get it. But being there, and then all of a sudden you're like, that's Robin Williams' daughter. And I'm like, oh shit, what the, and you're like, this person did this and this and this. And I was like, wow, that's really crazy that just at that time, because I hadn't seen anybody that was like famous or whatever, and everyone knows Robin Williams. Sure. And just to be next to her and think like, man, this girl, she probably has like a little vial of flubber at home somewhere, and that is like you know what I mean, that's the coolest shit ever. Sure. That's so cool. And like, and it was just a normal day, and we went around and we shot, and it was like guerrilla style, and we were popping out in front of this and this, and you guys just were so passionate about it, and seeing that just was like a level up for me to see that, and to go home and then be able to like regurgitate that content back into what we were doing, and just see that you can do all this stuff on multiple levels. But I don't know, maybe, I don't know, every time it's always just kind of nuts.
It must be pretty crazy though to be in some of the places that you're shooting in now and not feel like, I mean, for me, it's like, I always try to, whenever I need a healthy dose of gratitude, I always try to say, is this something that the 14-year-old version of me would think is tight? You know, like, and to remind myself, because the 14-year-old version of me wasn't necessarily always like, yeah, but how much money did you make? Yeah, exactly. Like, the 14-year-old version of me didn't always have the caveat of like, yeah, but did it go really viral, or was it just kind of like it had a good run or type of thing? You know, there was never that kind of qualification for the 14-year-old version. It was always just like, you know, and so for me, one of the things that I do every year is, you know, on my birthday, which is also like right next to the New Year, which is January 4th, I always write a list of my hopes and my fears.
That was yesterday.
January 4th?
Oh, no, February. We're in February. Close. Damn, I was like, my fault.
You've been on the road too long, man.
Sorry. Happy belated.
Yeah, thank you. But every January 4th, I try and write a list of like, these are the things that I'm afraid will happen, and these are the things that I really want to happen. I'm not making lists like, you know, I want to be a millionaire or something like that. They're things that feel like practical. But I also put the fears that seem practical, like, you know, like I want, you know, my friends and family to be healthy or whatever. I want, you know, I'm afraid that, all interest in Morley will just somehow dry up, and I'll just have to, you know, be like just back to doing it for myself, which is not the worst thing in the world, but it's sometimes it's like, you know, oh, if no one was paying any attention again, how would that feel? You know, and sometimes that does become like a thing that I worry about. But
yeah, it makes sense.
But for me, one of the big things that I do every single year when I'm writing my hopes down is I say, I want someone that I respect to, or rather someone that I admire to respect what I do, you know? And so if I can find, that can be something as small as like, oh damn, that guy who's, you know, I've always really liked, he retweeted something, or, you know, liked something on Instagram, or, like for example, in the book that I just put out, you know, I reached out to Art Alexakis, who is the singer from the band Everclear. Yeah. And I'd said, he wrote the foreword for the book, and I thought, you know, I thought of him because of the fact that, you know, he's written a lot of songs that are sort of like quintessential California songs, you know, and I thought he would be a good person to sort of write about what exactly, you know, like how my artwork can kind of like work within the sort of microcosm of California and Los Angeles specifically. And I reached out to their management because I was like, I don't know if he's ever seen any of my work. You know, I live in Los Angeles, and it's possible that he's seen something I'd done. And his management was like, you know, yeah, actually, Art really likes your artwork and is interested in doing it. And I was like, and so knowing that, like, I grew up like really just admiring him, and knowing that he somehow could say, like, you know, I respect what you do, that to me was so much more valuable to me than selling a $10,000 painting.
Right.
You know? I
yeah.
mean, so
you spend years, so many days thinking about, and $10,000 goes away like this.
So fast.
That memory won't go away.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That, you know, people don't ever think about that. They don't realize, like, it's funny when you see, you know, people on reality shows and you think, like, man, how did the thing that made them successful enough to get a reality show, like these, you know, what is it, Dancing with the Stars or whatever,
right?
And you think,
Housewives.
like, yeah, like how did, you know, where did the money go? And it's like the money goes away.
Yeah.
You know, like people can, you know, and you don't realize it's just like a lot of these people out in Los Angeles, they're just people working on jobs, and they're like, you know, like there was a guy who was on a TV show, and he was a waiter at a restaurant. And he was like, yeah, I mean, I made a couple of, you know, bad financial mistakes, but also just never got another shot at a big TV show again, you know? And you're like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the world of Los Angeles, and really everywhere. I mean, but, you know, so I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here.
I love it. It's I think that I love that, because I thought it was cool for me to be back home in Iowa, and then to be on Instagram and see my friend from Iowa, Joni Schaefer. I'll shout her out right now because I know that this was her. But I remember her posting your shit on her Instagram. But she lived in Minnesota at this point. And I'm like, how do you know that? Because I forget that things can be shareable on the internet. Yeah. She's like, oh my God, I love this stuff. I'm like, he's pretty much my cousin. That's crazy. She's like, what? Like, that was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been a huge thing that I hadn't expected, is that, you know, after I started working with Steve Lazaridis and the Outsiders, the social media stuff became much bigger. I kind of put it on there because I started an Instagram account and a Facebook account because I thought, well, this stuff gets taken down or painted over so fast that at least a photo of it can live on a little bit longer. And I didn't realize, like, not only does it extend the sort of lifespan of the piece, but also it's something that can be shareable all over the world. You know? Which has been great. I mean, unfortunately now I think it's a lot of people like me and anybody who's, you know, content creators have to now live in the post algorithm world where everything they do can be kind of swallowed up by you know, whatever is Instagram is the whims of Instagram's algorithms. But at the same time, I will say this. On the one hand, it's really frustrating to feel like I'm not reaching the people that sort of were interested, you know, have been interested enough in my stuff to follow me or whatever on social media. And the fact that I feel like, wow, I can't access more than like 1% of them when I post something. At the same time, it also has kind of been good to be like, yeah, post something and then kind of forget about it. Yeah. And just don't stop, you know, don't get too obsessed with the numbers. Don't get too obsessed with things, because it's like you can't control a lot of that stuff as much as you sort of try. And I think that, you know, those things can be really frustrating, but at the same time, it's like, maybe it's also good that I care less than I was before about how much people were, not that I never saw myself as being like an influencer or anybody who was really trying to, like, you know, to get as many people to, you know, to subscribe to my feed or whatever. But I will say it was always encouraging to be like, okay, this many people seems to be sort of listening and paying attention, and I'm going to try and sort of like get a sense, okay, like what are they responding to? What, you know, is there anything that I can sort of, you know, gain from them and the feedback I'm getting? Yeah. And I think it's definitely a good and a positive thing, but at the same time, I think you can kind of get lost in trying to please everyone.
It's terrible.
You know? Yeah. So
I see a lot of people struggle with that, especially that have had some sort of resonance and like just presence online. Yeah. Even for me to go on tour, I see it all the time. I go on tour, and the first big tour I did was Schoolboy Q and, you know, some random shit with Kendrick. And then I get off the road and I have all of his fans that have seen my shit through touring, and I'm getting tagged by him and whatever. So I get this direct, a lot of it is filmmakers, people that they just want to be into creating content, visuals, whatever I was doing, photography. And then as time goes on that I'm not on that tour and I'm not just posting that stuff I was doing on that job, I'm posting the next job, those fans disappear, those posts, and then Beyonce and Jay-Z things are even worse because it's like I have the beehive fucking all up in my thing, and if I post something about this podcast, which this is funny, so this goes back to what you were just asking, me having gone on this tour and working with them, first working with Beyonce, and was like humbling as fuck, and to be able to do Coachella and everything, and her to tell me that she liked what I was doing was so cool. And then to be on tour with them and randomly just Jay walking up to me and just be like, man, you're fucking it up with the camera, man. I see you, you're killing it, blah, blah. And to be applied, I'm like, so how are you telling you're telling me that I'm good at something? Like, this is insane, which is funny because I wish people knew that, because what he's saying is he likes what I do. And so it's just as a substance of me and as a person and what I'm doing. But like, if I post something that I'm doing on there and they're fans that are obsessed with this content, if they don't see that as them, they aren't, there's no respect that same way, which is so funny, because then that all of a sudden that post, if I post this podcast, I'll post a snippet on my Instagram feed and I guarantee you this shit gets 1,000 views. If I post Beyonce, Jay-Z, anything having to do with tour, dancers, any of that stuff, thousands and thousands of views. It's just ridiculous, because that's just how it is. I think it's also, though, there's certain, and you can get kind of lost in the conspiracy of the algorithm and thinking like, but I'm sure there's also certain things that are like, oh, an image of Beyonce suddenly just clicks up higher than an image of, And I say that all the time too. That's why I tried to make it, and me and Dave, who helps me out with all this Black Window Cream shit, we had this conversation all the time, because he was also shooting on the road. And when we would shoot, we'd share these little moments on our Instagram, and I already had like a larger following, so it was easier. I was just getting more momentum. But for him, he would post, and I was very active and I like to play a character on my stories and just be this absurd, just like whatever it is. I try to be funny, and I love comedic value with Instagram stories. So I'm always actively on here, and therefore when we'd walk into a venue, me and Dave may walk in, and right away I'm being recognized because they remember seeing me from the stories. So then if I bake my face into it, if you can connect it, just like if I just see words on a picture, it's just words on a picture, but then all of a sudden I see your hand up and you just got done writing it and your head's looking over here. Like, I know it's yours. It sticks out to me like, oh shit, this is something I remember following on purpose. I think that's when you start getting into the idea of seeing you as a brand, which is, I think, has value, because I think that for, like what you're talking about with like putting yourself into the stories, I think it creates a human element that people connect with on a level that is genuine. And it's not just that, like, I think of course you're funny, and but they also see you as like someone they can relate to and appreciate on a level that they're like, wow, this isn't, because there are a lot of photographers that sort of put themselves in it, but you have such a great personality and you're so warm in those stories that I think people see themselves, as being like, I'm hanging with my friend, and then it's like, wow, I'm hanging with my friend and we're shooting Beyonce and Jay-Z. Yeah, exactly. And I think that that is a wonderful thing, because you're really creating a relationship. I always go back to this documentary called Imagine with John Lennon. And at one point in the documentary, a homeless guy sort of wanders onto his yard, and he and Yoko come out. And obviously I'm sure that the fact that there were cameras filming sort of informs us a little bit, but John Lennon talks to the guy, and the guy says, I want to know how you reached into my head and took out those songs. How did you, why were you writing these songs for me, specifically? And John had to say, like, well, I mean, I pulled them out of my head. They're for me, and they're, like, I'm singing about myself and my own experiences, and and my love for my wife and my child and things like that. And and then he invites the guy in, and they eat dinner together. And obviously the guy is crazy, the homeless guy, but at the same time, you understand how, that relationship that you can create with an artist, where you feel such a strong connection to that person because you feel like they get you, they understand you, and sometimes it's more casual, and it's more like, no, I just think they're just funny, just magnetic personalities, and sometimes it's that feeling like, no, they are speaking for me, like they've articulated something that has felt trapped inside my head for so long, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing it or seeing it expressed, and it's like releasing it. It's like opening the cage door, or finally it's like
they like, I feel like I'm speaking a language that only I know how to speak, and all of a sudden they've taken, you know, my words and they've translated into a way that everybody can understand. And now all of a sudden I understand myself better, and the world understands, you know, all that stuff. And so I think that, like, that is one of the greatest things that you can create, you know, is this sense of, you know, not being alone, not being, you know, like, being understood. I think that the only dangerous part of that is when we start seeing ourselves as being just sort of brand ambassadors to who we are. And then it's like, then you start getting into that world where it's like, you know, you're you know, sort of influencers that are literally, all they do is their brand is their own existence and their life, and whatever they can kind of curate into being like, look at me at the beach hanging out, you know, and living this perfect life that everybody aspires to, and to follow me is to feel like you're my friend, and we're all living this life, when they're not necessarily showing all of the struggles, and, you know, and the brand is sort of only works as long as it's kind of idealized.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
And only as long as a person is beautiful, only as long as a person is, you know, and so you're not getting the, you know, the true sort of hardships of life. You're not sharing those things. And so I feel like that, you know, for me, I think, you know, when you start looking at every artist as being its own brand, you know, on the one hand, I think there's a lot of really wonderful, you know, connections to be made with people where they can feel like, you know, and that's when, like you said earlier, when I've gotten emails from people saying like, oh, I was thinking of committing suicide, and your, you know, work sort of made me think twice. I think it's important to, you know, see the value of that and saying like, wow, what I'm doing affected that person. On the other hand, I also think it's important to sort of take that with as much humility as possible and realize like, I don't know how much I had to do with that as much as I was part of the sort of magic that allowed, you know, that person to see that thing at that moment before it got, you know, pasted over or torn down or, you know, but whatever, you know, knowing that like I can't control that person walking by or that person seeing it means that I can't take credit for it either, you know, at least not entirely, you know? And so for me, it's like, I just get excited when I feel like I got to be part of the magic, you know, I got to be part of the fact that this person, you know, at the right time in their life, that somehow my message resonated with them, you know? And I think that, you know, so again, I'm kind of all over the place, but I do think that, you know, every artist should see the value of creating artwork and having themselves be a part of that artwork and having themselves be an integral sort of part of what they're doing so that people feel that connection. Yeah. Because so much, especially in life, is, you know, these connections that we have are so hard. You know, friendships are hard to maintain because we're so busy all the time. And, you know, the digital world, it gives you that false sense of connection, you know, like, oh, I know what my friend on Facebook is doing. It's like, but have you had a conversation with them in the last 5 years, or do you just know when their birthday is because it alerts you, you know, type of thing, you know? So I think that having any kind of, you know, relationship that can feel deeper and more intimate on a personal level, I think is really important. And I think a lot of times people look to things that, you know, like the art they consume for a lot of those connections. And I think that that's great. But I think also at the same time, you know, we do need to be aware of, you know, seeing ourselves only as an extension of what people are seeing. And then all of a sudden these things that are supposed to be, you know, honest expressions are actually curated expressions, because we don't want to look uncool. We don't want people to see us looking, you know, like unsuccessful. We don't want to see that, like, you know, you're on tour, but then there's chunks of times when you're not on tour and when you're like, when's the next job going to come, you know, and that kind of a thing. And those frustrating moments, but it's like those frustrating moments though, someone knowing that those exist means that they'll feel like, great. So it's hard for everybody. And I don't have to feel like I'm a failure because I didn't just go from one job to the next job, to the next job, to the next job, you know? So
we were just talking about this with, my fucking cars. I mean, I've had that thing since I was in like high school. So that thing's it died pretty much.
Sure. Yeah.
It gets Lauren to the gym and back without overheating, and it's good. But that happened while I was on tour. So I'm like, shit, I need to get a new car. I get back here. And when I'm in Hollywood, I just ride my electric skateboard everywhere. So I never need a car. And now that we're moving out to like Woodland Hills, I need to get a car. So I started looking, I'm like, damn, what do I want? And then I start thinking like, oh, I have to have a car. Like I need something that's going to last me a while. But then I'm also thinking, damn, we're trying to work with these big brands, and when we take these meetings, do I want to be pulling up in something? So do I need to lease a car? Do I need to be spending $500-$600 a month just to get a fucking whatever it's going to be, something that looks nice and new in 2019? And I remember it going back to like this lady. I was on this job. I did a drone video for Loctite, which was one of the funniest drone videos I've ever had to do, just because I'm like, Loctite, what the fuck, the glue? And anyway, we're driving, and I was riding with the person that hired me, producer maybe, I don't remember what her role is, but she was talking to the other guy, and they were like, yeah, so do you still have this car? And she's like, oh, I have this old piece of shit car. And what'd you get? He's like, well, I got this car because, you know, you are what you drive in LA. And I'm like, you are what you drive in LA. And then I'm thinking like, damn, that's kind of true, and I could understand that, where to the extent, and this has been my argument because I'm trying to debate, do I get this lease where you could still get like a decent for like a couple $100? And then my mom just totally turned my book around and told me like, don't lease a car, David Ramsey or whatever, listen to this guy. And but anyway, it came down to like, do I spend money to have something that's like that? So when I do happen to go to the meeting where I pull up at the same time the client gets there, my theory is like, I do want to have something that looks like I get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for jobs all the time and can handle that, because that's what we're trying to pitch them on. But if I show up in like an old shitty whatever my car is, I don't have time to tell them, I don't care about my car. I put all my money into my ideas and my gear, and that's what I do. I invest in myself outside of a vehicle. Like I don't have time to pitch that to them. And that shit becomes a struggle. So you really start thinking about it. I just talked about that on my story. So I was like, hey guys, what do I do? I don't know how to,
it's a challenge too. And it's funny because like people, there's such a small quantification of value in the sense that like, you know, it's the same thing. I think when you start, you know, it's funny because like I remember I did an art show once, and a guy, you know, saw the prices for my art, and he said, you shouldn't charge that much. And I was like, well, you know, I mean, I kind of arrive at those prices with, you know, not only sort of looking at what other, you know, sort of at the scene that I'm in, but also in my experience, I, you know, arrived at those prices because the guys at The Outsiders sort of helped me figure that out. And also I'm working with the galleries and figuring out prices with them. He's like, yeah, but you can always just make more. You should just sell it for like nothing. And I was kind of like, I don't really have time to explain to you that, you know, art has a sort of, you know, a variable cost and you know, but
I like this guy,
but it was a little bit, I was like, you know, I was like, I kind of understood, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, I mean, we as artists have to create value for ourselves. You know, we have to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to say my value is. And so even though like, especially I think coming from Iowa, guys like you and I, there is that moment sort of like when, you know, like I'm sure for you, when someone says like, okay, how much, you know, would you need to do this job? You have to be the person that says, okay, do I pitch high? Do I pitch low? Like, you know, and I think there's a sort of blue collar mentality of like, I shouldn't pitch high. That would make me seem like, who the hell am I to try and make that much money?
You always do
job?
That. Like, why the fuck do we do that? I just told you about the morning roast episodes. Tomorrow is Wednesday, right?
Yep.
Tomorrow, the episode is called Say Yes Until You Can Say No. And that was like my entire mentality coming out here. I'm sure almost any creator that's kind of gotten anywhere, you think of that because you have to say yes to all these shitty deals and bad rates and all these things that you have to just go through it till you learn. You kind of, okay, cool. And you did what you did where you start sizing up other people you see, and you can kind of collect that idea of what it is, but it's also just your value of like, what if you have to make a living off this? Like, I don't clock in every day. I don't have someone giving me my insurance. I don't have someone doing my 501, you know, all these things that add up. So you have to say like, this is how much this costs. And then I don't know why we always feel like, I feel bad when I give someone an estimate. I'm like, here, but then that's what I've just learned to say is like, I put it out there now at this point, and if they say no, I'm okay to take the L on that and just be like, I'd rather remove my finances around to find a way to be living cheaper so that I don't have to take that job at that rate and be known as, I can do this. And
the truth is that people will never pay you more until you make them. You know, like, you know, it's funny. I've met more than a few people that are like interns or PAs and stuff like that. And, you know, it's not only money, it's also just with how you're treated too. You know, like I had this horrible experience, but it's funny. But so this guy, a long time ago, I was working my day job was I was cutting casting for a reality TV show.
Right.
And so I was working from home, and I got a call from these people that are like, we want you to edit this thing that we need, tomorrow by noon or whatever. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I was like, okay, well, drop the tapes off in the morning, and I'll do what I can and get it to you. She's like, we want to get you the tapes tonight. I was like, I mean, I'm not going to edit it tonight. I'll edit it tomorrow. I'll start tomorrow. It's too late to start tonight. And she's like, that's fine, but we want you to have them right away. And I was like, okay. And then, so like 11:30 or whatever, some poor PA drives over in his like pajamas, and he's like, here's the tapes. And I was like, I'm so sorry, man. I want you to know, I didn't say I wanted these tapes tonight. And the person was like, yeah, the woman that, my boss, she was like, no, you got to do this. And I was like, she was like, I was asleep, my one night off or whatever type of thing. And I was like, well, you can tell her, like, I'm sorry, but this is not something I'm willing to do, just do it professionally and say, like, I'm so sorry, but just, like, once I leave the office, I kind of am done.
Labor laws,
something like that. I was just like, because if you never say that stuff, she will just keep treating you like shit, and you'll just keep having to, like, swallow whatever, her whim. And so the next day, I, call up the people, and I'm like, so I'm done, if you want to send the PA back over and pick up the tapes, whatever.
He's like,
oh, he's been fired. And I was like, what? And it was like, oh yeah. Last night he was like saying, like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I need to, like, sort of draw a line and say, this is when I can no longer work, and I was like, who do you think you are? You're fired. And I was like, oh no. And I realized I got that poor guy fired by saying, like, stand up for yourself a little bit. But I do think, though, that, like, it's amazing when artists, especially like musicians or whatever, or, I've just met a lot of people who have been like, they'll be like, I'm putting this out. I feel so weird asking people to buy it, like online or whatever. And I'm like, don't feel that way.
No.
Like, embrace it. Say, I am worth selling something. I am worth having someone say, I'm going to pay for this. Now, the truth of it is, I think, like, obviously there's an exaggerated version where if you said to a client, like, oh, I want they want an estimate, and you're like, $1 million for a week of work, and they'll be like, well, we can't afford that. Obviously that's crazy, but generally you find if you have a practical idea of what the industry, sort of going rate is, you find pretty quickly, okay, this is what I can do, Right. And for me, as far as with artwork, there's sort of two different ways of looking at it. There's the people that can say, I want to sell one painting for $5,000, or they can sell, or they can say, I want to sell, 500 prints for $100,
Yeah.
And obviously both ways you're getting $5,000. But for me, it's like, I would rather sell 100 prints for cheaper and know that I'm going to, that many more people are going to have my artwork than make the $5,000.
Right.
And there's just different kinds of artists. And so you sort of follow different business plans with that, as far as, like, someone like Shepard Fairey, who does, like, the Obey and the, and stuff like that. He's not going to sell stuff in a gallery at the same price as an artist who doesn't create prints, or doesn't create, who doesn't do, he creates stuff that sort of lowers his own value, but he does it in a way that sort of makes more money for him because he's selling a lot more prints that are cheap and affordable,
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's sort of a side alleyway of this conversation, but, but I do think the point I was trying to get with was just how important it is for artists, especially artists that are the people that are deciding, creatives, you have to be the first person that dictates what your value is, because no one else is going to say, you know what? I know that you said you can do this for this much, but I'm going to give you more. It's
right.
like, that's not going to happen,
Ever.
So, be practical, but also, be confident in the sense that, like, you are the first person that dictates whether you're a professional or not.
Yep. Even when we would go back to, like, making music, and we'd book shows and we'd try to play our shows for people, and I would tell people to come out, we'd promote it, and then people would go to buy a ticket or try to buy our merch. And if I was the one selling it, I'd be like, man, I don't want to sell you, like, just take this shirt. Like, I just appreciate you fucking with me. Like, it would cost us $5.
Yeah.
Like, you want to give me $5 and just cover the cost? Like, I never wanted to, like, make money off people. I just couldn't. I learned that actually back in Iowa when I started doing Google photography, and I started doing the virtual tours for Google Maps.
Cool.
So I started doing that, and I had to learn real quick. I just thought the tech would sell itself. I had to learn how to sell, and going in, then I started like learning how to talk to clients and be like, oh, this is how much this costs, and this is why it costs that much money. And then people would, okay, cool, and they'd start writing checks, and I'd be like, oh, cool. I just have to validate why, and we try to teach that too with this. It's like you have to at some point put your foot down, but you also have to make sure that you're able to provide quality. Like once you've learned and you've done all of the training you can, obviously we're still learning, but there's a certain point where you can put your foot down and show the value. My dad always says it. It's like, don't sell yourself short. And so that's super true. You don't ever want to, and you also need to look at salaries. Like I always just tell people like, what salary would you want to make? Everyone asks me about touring. Like, how much do you get? I'm like, well, to tell you the truth, artists never pay good money for touring. Like you're not going there to make like the money, you know what I mean? Even though a lot of people think it is, once you get to Beyonce and Jay-Z, it's a little bit better, but it's not like life-changing, like I won $1 million type scenario. But I always tell people like, try to fight for like your salary. Like just think about obvious shit. Don't just pull a trigger and say like, I'll do it for $1,000 a week. I'll do it for $500 a week. Like, how much is your rent? Like how much does your everything else cost? Like you just have to think of these things. But I know a lot of people struggle with that, and I hate that I feel like as creatives, like selling our art have to feel like that, because I don't walk into any store and look at it fucking brand new iPhone and be like, yeah, why are they, you know what I mean? I don't care. It's
funny because that's exactly what I thought of when that guy said, but you can just make a bunch. I'm like, Samsung can make a bunch of more flat screen TVs and it costs them a penny. But it's like, at the same time, they've decided this is the value of our product. This is how much, if you don't want to buy it, that's completely on you. Don't buy it. I think that there are ways of figuring things out. I think that like, you can have a sliding scale and say, in your case, you could say like, okay, well, but here's something I really care about, a cause that really means something to me. So I'm going to like skew my day rate for this because of the fact that I want to try and help this organization or whatever, you know. For me, it's like, the women's shelter is trying to raise money. Yes. Take a painting, sell it for as much as you can and keep all of the money and put it into the shelter or whatever, and for me, it's also like I try to always have some sort of something. If someone wants to buy something from me, that's great. I buy a pack of stickers. It costs almost anybody can afford something. So I always try to have like mini posters or prints or stickers or whatever. And then but at the same time, know that like if someone who can afford it wants to spend $5,000-$10,000 on a giant piece of art or whatever, like make it. Yeah, say like there's no reason to say no to that. Be like, you sure you don't want something cheaper? Yeah, everything. So I think it's finding that middle ground, finding a way to feel good about whatever your sort of business plan is, figuring out a way. People always say like, what is selling out? And to me, it's selling out is. It's not, there's nothing selling out unless you're abandoning your convictions. Like people say like, did Shepard Fairey sell out because he has a clothing line that's sold in like Urban Outfitters and stuff like that? And to me, it's like only if he ever thought to himself, I'll never have a clothing line. You know what I mean? Like it's only selling out if you're saying like, wow, when I started this, I never would have done this. But somehow I wound up being okay with it, and if you can't sort of, and maybe that came through a justification that was sincere because you've educated yourself on things, but at the same time, like for me, one of the things that was really a challenge was, I grown up and have been straight edge for, since I was a young guy in high school.
You still are?
Still am, yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not my straight edge, sort of lifestyle isn't as much now about like purity or anything like that as much as it's just like I'm happier and just feel fine with like I don't know why I would necessarily pick up a habit if I didn't have to, but there's not I'm not like there's not necessarily a sense of superiority or something against anybody my wife drinks and all that stuff, but. So I was approached by Smirnoff Vodka to do a campaign with them. And I actually had been, nervous about it because I was like, I don't drink. It's also very Brandy, this not Brandy, the musician.
She's
great. She's great. Yeah, it's very much like Brandy. The Boy Is Mine with Robin. it just felt like, is this selling out to work with such a corporate organization?
Right.
And when they came to me, they said, we just want to create art that is something, a series of posters that are interactive in some way and talk about inclusivity. And the reason for that was because they're like, the brand wants to sort of show themselves as being inclusive because that's what millennials are all about right now, is inclusivity.
Okay.
Which I think is, obviously sort of like a little cheesy to be like, like, okay, I guess I'll make your brand look more inclusive. But at the same time, I was like, okay, I get it. How can I try and make that idea something that isn't crappy? And so they said, what can you do? And so I said, well, here's my idea. I'm going to go out, I'm going to interview people, real people, record these interviews, and I'm going to use their interviews to inspire messages that will be on the front of these posters. And then at the bottom, it says, if you want to hear the story that inspired this message, go to this link. And they can then go to it and they can hear the person actually talk and say their story. And they're like, great. Who would you talk to? And I said, a dancer, a person who's, a waiter, a person who's, transgender, a person who's, any of these different things. And they said, that's great. We love it. Can they all be immigrants? And I was like, well, I was excited by the idea, but I was also like, how am I going to find all those? Like now I have to find an immigrant transgender person. Like that's going to be a challenge. But I was like, you know what? That's okay. Let's do it. Because to me, I was like, the idea of being able to give that person a literal voice to tell their story, so that all of a sudden it wasn't just a story of like immigrants are just this idea that are being thrown around. It's funny because right now we're recording this and it's during the State of the Union.
Yeah.
And obviously so it's such a hot button issue, the idea of immigration, especially legal immigration. And, for me to have the ability to use my art to give voice to these people, to be able to tell their stories and be human beings and not just, sort of a political volleyball that gets, knocked back and forth. I thought that's got real value to it.
Right.
And that's something that can be, that can go beyond sort of like, am I selling out to give these people the chance, and not only give them the chance, but also have a kind of a major, huge brand, help empower that and put those posters up. Finally, I'm not just putting these up myself. These are posters that were like plastered all over the city by Smirnoff Vodka, who has
so
pretty
cool.
deep pockets. So that was a really cool way of being able to work with a brand. And I mean, the only caveat that they had at all was like, can we put a little tiny drawing of like the Smirnoff logo in the corner? And I was like, fine, I get it. You've got certain parameters you need, but other than that, I was shocked with how much freedom they gave me. And so then,
it's really cool. And it's so in line with like who you are,
well,
what
thanks.
you create.
So that was an experience, and and I think that each, time that, that especially if we have convictions about like, clients that we work with and different people and things of that nature, I think that, being able to assess and say, okay, what's, not only is this going to help me, in some way, shape, or form, practically, financially, whatever. Is this also going to be something that I can feel proud of in terms of like, the work that I've done, and then also just then the sort of the math of saying, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right.
Like is the amount of work I'm going to put into this going to be something that I'll feel like it was, worth it? And so.
That's awesome. And you try to think of like, how do you partner with brands that makes sense to approach it that way?
Well, especially when what I do as an artist has so much tied with integrity in the sense that like, people want to believe that street artists are beyond the same needs than your standard artist, and that's why that they give their art away for free. No one wants to think that Banksy actually has to pay his rent. They think like he's fine just doing whatever he does and is just being this sort of Robin Hood, type idea. But at the end of the day, it's like every artist needs to, if they want to support themselves as an artist, they need to be, find ways of doing that without losing their integrity and their convictions, but also I think losing the idea of their integrity, which goes back to the sort of branding notion of like, no one wants, at the end of the day, it's like, as much as I strive for honesty, if no one thought what I was doing was quote unquote cool, the value of it would sink pretty quick. You know what I mean? Because people need to feel like, you know, what you're doing is cool to some degree, especially as a street artist, which can be, you know, frustrating sometimes as well, because it's like, sometimes I just want to be uncool. Sometimes I just want to be, you know, like my uncool self, you know? So again, it's sort of finding that middle ground of like, okay, this can, you know, be something that's honest and real and people can relate to it, but at the same time, it still feels like it has an integrity and isn't just like, you know, the sort of puppet for a brand or whatever, just like anybody else in the street that's, you know.
So then what's on a day-to-day, how do you manage, because there's Morley and then Morley, who's a real person. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's Morley on paper, and then there's you as a real person who has a family and everything, and you work and do things that normal people do. How do you balance, like, what is a day like for you? How the fuck can you go? Because I can go pull up in Venice or something, and all of a sudden I'm walking, I look over and there's a Morley piece. I'm just like, oh shit, that's crazy. You cover a lot of ground in LA. I try to. I mean, because, you know, for me, the hope is finding different environments to sort of work within, you know, like if I just kept, you know, not only the environments, but also the communities that are around them. If I just kept creating art for the same kind of group of people, then it starts to get sort of vaguely masturbatory and sort of like, you know, it's funny because I created a piece very close to here. And while I was creating it, someone walked up to me and they said, you know, hey, did you know that there's a house called The Way In that's like 2 blocks from here that's for, you know, at-risk people that are like runaways, for them to be able to come and get on their feet and sort of like, you know, find themselves? And I was like, yeah, I did know that there was that. I actually created a big piece for the, you know, for their a big mural in their hallway. And he said, oh, because I was going to say, like, sometimes I see your pieces and I feel like it's sort of tone deaf because, you know, like, I don't know if this would, you know, if those kids are going to get anything from like a piece about, you know, Instagram or something like that. And I said, well, I mean, it's still East Hollywood too, you know, like there's a lot of people that are, you know, like, you know, not every piece is going to, you know, vibe with every person that walks by, you know. Obviously I try to be somewhat aware of the community that I'm going to be, you know, creating artwork for. You know, because obviously you want to start speaking to the sort of the community as a whole, but you also can't know every single person. I mean, just go stand like over on the corner of like one street and just watch the people that walk by. It's everyone on Earth. Yeah, for sure. For sure. But so, you know, I try my best to sort of like get as far and as wide as I can to create artwork, you know, for the different communities and what, you know, the stuff that they'll relate to, hopefully. And that, I mean, means that I'm only going to have, I can have a cursory understanding of what kind of a community Venice is. I can have a cursory understanding of what kind of community Silver Lake is, or, you know, Marina del Rey, or, you know, even when I go beyond Los Angeles and I'll travel to different states and countries, you know, I went to Nicaragua, for example, and that required me to not only translate my stuff, especially trying to translate it into their specific form of Spanish, but also, you know, educate myself a little bit as much as I can to their community and the stuff that they sort of actually deal with in a real way, right? And the history of that, you know, and the kind of stuff that whether it's the sort of political landscape or whether it's just the sort of you know, economic landscape, whatever, like understanding the people I'm talking to, you know, because there's a certain kind of arrogance of going in and just being like, whatever I'm saying, I'm sure someone will relate to this, you know, type of thing. You know, and so it's funny because one time I went to Michigan. And Detroit is sort of right now known for being like this great hub because there's so many sort of like old kind of dilapidated structures and places to create street art. And that's true. I went there and there was fantastic street art, but I also got the sense that people were starting to get tired of like, oh, all these artists come to town and just kind of like treat us like we're a blank canvas. Yeah. Like, and they sort of look at like they just being like, you're welcome. And then they leave type of thing. And I sort of realized like, wow, I get why that would be annoying and why that would be frustrating. And so, you know, I try and sort of understand that with any kind of community that I go to sort of like arrive with respect and an understanding of like, you know, the sort of, the political, not in the sense of like, you know, Republican, Democrat, but the politics of any place of just those sort of local, you know,
vibe that the city has and the people that are there and what they're sort of struggling with and what they're sort of like, who they kind of are and the identity of that community, and sort of like creating art that feels aligned with that identity to some degree.
Are you doing the research on the place that you plan to go? How much of it is like you're creating pieces and you're going and looking for places that make sense for that piece? Or are you, maybe you're having coffee somewhere with a friend and you look up and you realize like, oh, this idea that I've had would work perfectly right here?
Well, in Los Angeles, it's kind of second nature, because you kind of just living here get a sense of the areas, you know, and then the people that live in those areas. But when I'm traveling to different places, I do try to sort of get, I talk to friends that I know are from there, or I, will just read about like from their local, newspapers, websites, and like get a sense of like, okay, this is the kind of thing, generally I'm going to a place where it's, in like the case of like Detroit, the history kind of is, the recent history sort of speaks for itself. People kind of have a general sense of it. And I sort of just kind of try to dig in a little bit to that. As far as Los Angeles goes though, and for the most part, I'm, I would say 80% of the time I'm driving around and finding a good spot. And then I sort of can go into the back of my, my car and say, okay, what poster works well with this? Because the temporary nature of something, like a spot's not going to last that long, no matter what. Someone's going to get it, or just someone's going to, put a fence over it pretty quick, you know? So I don't really like, I would say it's only about 20% of the time do I see a spot as I'm driving, think, this would be good for this type of a message, and then I go home, create it, and come back to it. Because oftentimes, by the time I get back to it, it's not what it was, or something like that. So, yeah.
So, what has been some of like the developments with having more notoriety and being invited by places like you said, like that children's home, or just even to be able to go plaster something up on the side of a business that actually asks you to do that. Right. How's the transition from that? Because I'm sure you've had plenty of run-ins where people are like shooing you away. Sure. Or maybe, I don't know, like you said, cops come up or something. What, how do you go about getting people to be interested in the idea of you like coming and putting something on their property? Well,
I never ask. There have been times where, I've been offered, certain people will reach out to me through, online or whatever, and they'll say like, hey, if you, and sometimes I'm sort of like, oh, thanks, but no thanks. Cause I can tell it's a business that's just wants me to put something that like,
oh yeah, could be cool looking.
And then they're like, great, free art. And make sure that you tell everybody to come to my business to see your art. And while they're here, they can buy, some running shoes or whatever. And in those types of situations, I'm kind of like, that's not really what I want to do. I don't really just want to be in the business of giving away free art. But
do you get commissioned to ever do stuff like that?
I am from time to time for sure. Yeah. And when that happens, it's it's great. I mean, it depends on the situation. If they're saying like, hey, I have a wall, you can do whatever you want with it, and I'll say, great. Can you cover any of the materials? Because I mean, just straight up, like the bare minimum is usually like, can you pay for a can of paint? Can you pay for the paste to put on the wall or whatever type of thing? But sometimes it's just like, hey, I have a boarded up fence. I know people are going to start tagging this thing. If you want to just put some artwork up, then you can kind of just put like, for example, there's a building on Hyperion and Udell, which is in Silver Lake. And while I'd sort of noticed this spot that kind of had been taken over by advertisements. It was like a boarded up like wall, and people would put ads over it, and I could kind of tell like this isn't like a wall that was intending to have ads on it. Like it wasn't an ad space that had been sold to these people. People were just putting fly paper ads up there, and so then I put up a piece of art, and it didn't. No one took it down, and advertisers didn't put their ads over it, and so then a couple weeks later, like it sort of naturally it started falling down. So I put a new piece up, and then like by the fourth time that happened, where I just putting a new piece up, finally some guy sort of stops me and says, I own this building. And at first I was like thinking like, should I run right now? Because he might just try and grab my arm and like handcuff me or something. But he said, I actually am so glad that you do this because I like it so much more than the ads. And he said, anytime you want to put something up here, you totally can. And so now it's kind of been one of the few spots in Los Angeles where I kind of know this is my spot.
Yeah, that's cool.
And in that specific case, it was a organic type of thing where I didn't ask, but I think that if you, as a street artist, if you kind of use some at least small degree of understanding that like, okay, how much am I going to bum this building owner out? You know, like whenever I, like, for example, find a boarded up building, I just put stuff on the boards, because as soon as they, you know, take the boards down, there's no damage done to the building. They can sell the building and it's just fine, you know, and there's just a piece of wood that's covering a window.
Yeah.
And to me, that's my ideal situation. I like that, not only because usually window frames like are sort of beautiful framing to a piece of art anyway, but also obviously like whatever the colors of the building, all that stuff, you know, kind of can really make a new layer to the artwork. But yeah, so sometimes it's as simple as a business saying, I want a piece of art in my restaurant, and I'll say, great, this is what I generally charge for a commission, and they'll say, great, and we'll pay it. Cool. Sometimes it'll be, you know, more organic, and I'll just be like, I just put up some piece of artwork, you know, and they, you know, don't stop me type of a thing. Right. But I would say 99.9% of the time, I'm just putting up a piece of art without any kind of permission, and that's hoping for the best. Yeah,
send it. The process of like going in and creating your merch too, like how did, you know, how much are you fulfilling your merch? Is that like something that you're actively trying to create new pieces that are always out? Is it just strictly posters? Are you and stickers like you said? Or are you ever doing t-shirts and things like that?
Yeah, it's funny because that's
I have one of your shirts. I had the suicide prevention one. Lauren got me that.
Yeah, very cool.
Lauren's probably your biggest buyer.
She's great.
Yeah, she gets all my stuff. Yeah.
She's great. That's been an interesting experience for me, is just slowly kind of, I've taken, you know, I've waded into the world of merchandise and business, you know, in that regard, slowly and surely. And it was really great to have people like Steve and Lazaridis and the Outsiders help me sort of get started with that. I've kind of gotten, it's become more important to me to have as much control over it myself as I possibly can in terms of like understanding, like, you know, if it's posters, you know, like finding the place where I can get a good price, but also a high quality piece of, you know, work and that kind of thing. And that's just been like a hit or miss type of thing. I probably have made every mistake known to man as far as like, you know, making something that, you know, a piece of merchandise that someone would want to buy, you know? And it's figuring out like, oh, you know, like t-shirts are really tough because like people might want them, but to get t-shirts and you have to buy them in every size, and you have to have, you know, like, and what happens if you sell out of mediums? Now you need a bunch of mediums, you know, and things like that. And a lot of these things I'd also learned from when I had a band in high school, and you sort of find things like that out, like, you know, like okay, how can I mass produce CDs? What is the cheapest way of making a CD that people can buy? And like, you know, all that stuff. And it can be fun sometimes, and it can be a huge drag other times, being like, wow, it's like, I love when someone in Germany wants to buy a poster of mine. I love that. But I hate sending and them saying like, okay, so now I have to spend, I'm buying a $20 poster, spending $30 on shipping. And it's like, and then to be like, and then they, you know, I get a picture, you know, 3 weeks later from them saying like, hey, it arrived like this and it's all smashed up. And I want to be like, great. Well, I mean, it was a $20 poster. So I would, you know, like I didn't bother insuring it, you know, like, I mean, things like that. You're just like, now I have to send another poster. So now I'm actually losing money because I'm sending another poster to make up for the poster that came that was just destroyed by the, you know, and then like, so in terms of like, you know, t-shirts, I work with a company called Designed by Humans, and they print to order. So they take a pretty big chunk of every, you know, sale, but it's like knowing that like if someone wants a medium of this t-shirt, they can order it that way. They take care of it and it's done. Although even that can be frustrating, because then you get people saying like, hey, I ordered through Designed by Humans and I didn't really like what they did to this. And I'm like, I'm not in charge of that stuff. I don't do quality control of like, you know, oh, I'm sorry that it shrunk in the wash or whatever type of thing. And people do sometimes expect you to have like 100% like I'm somehow like, and I'm like, dude, I am just an artist trying to get by. Like I can't, not everything, you know, like I'm sorry that, you know, that you know, bought a piece through a gallery and the gallery sent something, you know, later than you had wanted it or something like that. Like the gallery sent it. Like it's not, you know, at a certain point, it's not on me, you know. Same thing with like the, you know, like the books. It's like at a certain point, I can't, as much as I want everybody who orders their book to get it on time, sometimes, you know, it arrives late because the publisher, whatever, you know, so. Merch
it's tough, but I mean, at the same time, it's something that can fuel what you're trying to do a little bit farther and allow you, if people understand that could be your source of income to be able to allow you to create more of what they like, I think that they can get behind it. But I know merch is always like, it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like with artwork too, like I sold a piece online, and once, and I, the whole thing was okay. So they agreed to the price for this, and I'm like, okay, great. It's going to cost this much to ship it. So I take it to the shipping place and say, I need a quote on how much it's going to cost to ship it. I'm standing there. They give me the quote. I, email the person who's buying the piece saying, great. So, this is how much it's going to cost to ship. So just, include that, PayPal me that plus the amount that you agreed to pay for the piece. And I'll ship it off to you. And they write back, great. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking like, so do I go home now with this piece? Or do I just
ship it?
And like it's and
you'll get paid back.
And of course, what happens? I do ship it, and of course, I don't get paid. The guy won't respond to anything. Won't I'm starting to like weeks pass, and I'm like, dude, I know you have the piece. I have the and he's and then I start seeing him like posting on like him hanging it on his wall, and I'm like, you never paid me.
Yeah.
So then he blocks me on Instagram or whatever, and I start writing at his like family saying, hey, just so you know, your son or whatever
it's so shitty.
Didn't pay for this, and like I was and then they would block me, and I was just like. This, as much as enraging as that was, I was like, especially because it's like, I'm glad you enjoy the positive message that that I painted on this, and you get to have it in your house, knowing that you like actively stole it from me, But then I thought, okay, this is a lesson for me though. I need to, like, as a businessman, I need to just sort of like say, I can't. As much as annoying as it must be to go home with the piece and then come back after he's paid the money and then ship it, that's the kind of thing that you learn the hard way when I think when you're entering into like when you're seeing things as a businessman in that regard.
Totally. No, it's definitely like a game and you have to play it. It is not easy
I'm sure there's been a million times when like, you've shot something and you're like, I kind of got a little bit of a bad vibe from this person, and you're like, is this check going to show up? Is the check going to show up? And then you got to do that game of chasing the guy. I worked with a gallery, and I won't go into too many details, but gallerists, man, can sometimes, some of them are fantastic and are have great intentions. Some gallery owners are just piles of shit that just like all they want to do is just make money off of artists because they're like, wait, I just have to have a space, and then the artists will pay to make the art, for the canvas and the materials. They'll come and they'll invite all their friends, so I don't really even need to promote anything. They'll invite all their friends. They'll show up. They'll buy a bunch of art. I'll get half of that art, the money for that art, and I've done really nothing for that other than have a cool space and then get to feel like I'm an art dealer or whatever. And then what happens when they when they sell some art, but then they have to pay their rent, and then the next show is supposed to come, and the check they're supposed to pay the previous artist happens, and they think, well, I'll just sell the next artist's artwork and pay that first artist back, and then that artist doesn't do as well. So then all of a sudden you've got artists that haven't gotten paid for artwork that they've sold, and then all of a sudden you've got gallery owners that are like, ooh, I don't know what to do. And recently I had a gallery owner who had a ton of my artwork and decided to close his gallery down. And he said oh yeah, I put all of the art from the gallery into a storage container because I couldn't afford the gallery anymore. I was like, why didn't you just call the artists and have everybody get their artwork back? Yeah. And he was like, oh, I did. And I was like, I never got called. And he's like, well, I couldn't afford the storage container anymore, so that got sold off, and now it's all in the wind. Now all of the art is gone. And I'm like,
what the fuck?
Yeah. So it's that's the kind of thing where you're like, how am I supposed to prepare for that? How am I as a businessman supposed to assume that kind of shenanigans are going to happen? The question is is any of that true? Did he just did he just sell all of the artwork for bargain basement prices and then just kept all the money and spent it, whatever? So, and in that case, it was he said, he wound up saying, okay, I'll give you, 25% of the value of the art of what I was selling it for. Cause normally it's the gallery gets 50% and the artist gets 50%. He's like, but since I didn't sell it technically and it's just gone, I'll give you, half of that. And I'm like, well, I guess that's better than nothing. And he's like, give me 6 months. And I'm like, I give him 6 months. 6 months passes.
Oh my God.
Of course he doesn't pay me. So now it's $6,000 is what he wound up ultimately, which is it's too small amount of money to sue him or go to that kind of a thing. But it's enough amount of money to really bother me and to be, and also the thought of all of my artwork, he had a number of pieces that are just gone. And I'm like, well, who has that artwork? And just so, you know, because obviously, like with artwork stuff, you start to feel like a connection to it. Like that's like I made that, I birthed that into the universe, and it's like, so you know, the frustrating things, they never finish. You know, I'm sure, like, you know, in the music world, it's like the gallery owner is like the promoter of a for a show, and I'm sure that, like, you know, all of the different artists that have been like, I want to make music, but now I have to spend, you know, a huge amount of my time chasing promoters and trying to get, you know, just what's fair.
Yeah,
you know?
It's fucking crazy, man.
Yeah.
What a vicious cycle. Goddamn. We've been... I don't want to keep you too long.
No worries. I'm sorry. I
no,
ramble.
This is great. I love it. That's why I'm like, we could probably talk forever. I hope the fucking first part of this podcast is there. So I'll cry. I guess we always have this audio as backup if worse comes to worse. I want to make sure I can let some people ask questions. I know I posted and got lost in the thing, but let me pull it up and make sure that I have it updated. Yeah. So like I said, I always like ask the community to ask questions, and honestly, watch my computer die right now, and it's not loading.
It's all right.
You know, I mean, I'm on top of it. Okay, here we go. Sean Sauce, he says, has there ever been a piece that you wanted to do, but it was too edgy and you decided not to do it? What was that idea?
That's a great question. I usually try and run all of my pieces by my wife to see not only if she sort of picks up what I was trying to, you know, convey, like, because sometimes my sort of process is I think of an idea of a sentiment or a concept, and then I think, okay, how can I boil that down to its most essential elements? How can I get that down to as few words as possible? And so sometimes within doing that, I will not be able to communicate what I wanted to communicate. So one time I had a piece, excuse me. One time I had a piece that was, I was trying to communicate the idea of the guilty pleasure that comes when you see an ex not doing well with their lives, you know, and because I thought that's something people can relate to. Yes. And also feeling like, you know, I feel bad that I get such pleasure out of seeing you not succeed, you know, because it's not you recognize that's not a good feeling to have, but at the same time, it's like admitting that and sort of, and so I said something, I had some poster that was something to that effect. And I showed it to my wife and she said, yeah, but you got to think about all of the people that are the exes that aren't doing well in their lives that will see that poster and will say, that makes me feel like shit, because that makes me feel like, oh, all my exes are getting all this joy out of me going through a rough patch in my life or whatever, you know? And I realized, like, wow, that's true, you know? And so that was an example of where I sort of abandoned that idea, because I realized, no, it's actually better. I'm not trying to sort of turn anybody into a villain in this scenario. And even though, you know, in our brains, we're always the hero and our exes are always the villains usually, or at least they're the, you know, they're just the people that
yeah,
whatever.
Right. I get you.
Yeah. So for me though, at the same time though, that like realizing that like there's a completely other side of that coin that needs to be, you know, that are human beings too. You know, I'm sure that I'm somebody's ex-boyfriend, or, you know, that they wish, you know, that they're happy. I, you know, don't have six-pack abs or something. I don't know, whatever, you know, like, so I, you know, that was an example of something, but I've also been called out sometimes for pieces that I think that people misinterpreted in a way that I thought was unfair. You know, like there was a piece that I had that said, I love you because we hate the same stuff. And someone posted like, you know, that's why the Nazis got together, because they all hated the Jews together. Is this like, and I'm like, you are taking that way too far.
Oh, worse. You
know, so I, as much as I try to be aware of how will people interpret this, sometimes you also have to let go and say, this isn't something that people are going to, that if they misinterpret it, it's not on me, you know?
Right.
And then there was one final piece that I'll bring up that I created that I put in Detroit actually when I was visiting, that I don't really post anymore, because even though I don't feel bad about the message, it's sort of people just, I got more response that I was like, whatever. The message was, how much what was it exactly? It was like, how much will be enough for them or how much will enough be until we make them share? Essentially saying like that the people of this world that sort of accumulate so much.
Yeah.
Not only how much will it be enough for them, but how much will it take before we say, you know what? You need to have less. You know, we need to, the people of this world need to be able to take some of that, because, you know, the bottom line is whether it's, you know, income, you know, inequality in terms of like, there shouldn't be 1% of the world that has, you know, that has all that, you know, more than 99% of the, you know,
that got kicked.
Resources.
That got backlash.
A lot of people were like, "You should never make someone share. That sounds like you're forcing. Like that sounds like you know, like you're forcing them. And we should, you know, people should want to share or something." And I was just like,
it's like,
okay,
do you know how many people at the top have 7 empty houses that are just complete and have the heat on and shit? And it's
So for me, it was. I didn't think it was that crazy of an idea, because to me it was like, no, it's a matter of us saying, you know, collectively as a culture and as a world, we're going to say inequality needs to be righted a little bit. Yeah. And obviously, we're not talking about, you know, kill all the rich people and steal and take all their money, but at some point we need to feel like, you know, giant corporations, like, you know, you hear about like Microsoft spending $500 million to help make affordable housing in Seattle, and you're like, you know what? That's really refreshing to hear. That's finally a giant corporation is going to say, you know what, maybe we can do something to try and, you know, tilt the sort of the balance a little bit closer to being like where we can, you know, all have enough. I'm going off on a political bent, but
it makes sense.
But that was one of those situations where I was like, just one after another of people saying, you know, like we should, you know, like this sounds like you're getting too political, or you're talking about, you know, fascism, or you're talking about, you know, whatever.
But I feel like you have to, if you don't have that, then you're not doing something right. Like I feel like just creating a message and they are going to interpret it however they're supposed to. Right. You know what I mean? Like that's how it works. Cause I post stuff and someone will talk shit on like, you should have done this. I'm like, should I have? Then get up here and do it yourself. Like if that's how you feel, then you do it. You write the message. You do this. I would love to see you try. It's not fucking easy. So
one of the there's a famous artist that I've since forgotten who said this quote, but the idea was that the only valuable criticism is another piece of artwork or another thing. Like if you don't like the movie, I mean, and that's not to say that we don't deserve to have opinions about things, but there's no real value to our opinions. Our opinions only have value when you use those opinions to create something that you feel fills that vacuum. So if you think the movie sucks, it's not good enough to just think it sucks. Yeah. You have every right to think it sucks, but that opinion has no value until you make a piece of art that doesn't suck. Right. You know what I mean? So
true.
I think that's true with, you know, and in this world of comment sections and stuff, like there's no value in someone saying you should have done this. It's like, no, you should have made what you thought I should have done.
Exactly.
You know?
100%. Goddamn. You had a podcast.
Briefly. Yeah. I played around with something. It was,
I think it was like one of the first ones I've ever listened to.
What?
I don't know. When was it?
Wait, which podcast?
It was like short stories.
Yeah. The Paper Crown podcast. Paper Crown,
yeah. When did you put that out?
A few years ago. Basically I wanted a new way of expressing myself. I felt a little hampered by just the posters and the messages. So I thought I want to be able to write little scenes, and it kind of drew back to my roots in screenwriting. And so I wrote little radio scenes, little, like, you know, duets and things like that. And it's still available, but they're
really cool. I remember listening to it and being like, because I think I had absorbed some. I wasn't like a fan of any particular podcast. Sure, I understood like the format, which is usually this, and you didn't do that. You know what I mean? Like you took me into like, it was just like an audio tape. You know, I could like listen to something, and it was just you writing it, and people were acting. That's so cool that you
feel that way. Thank you.
Yeah, and I remember I don't. You haven't done it in a while, right?
Yeah, I haven't done it in a while. I might start doing it again, but it was a process, as you know, obviously, like with this.
They're pain in the ass. But those were really tight.
Thanks, thank you.
So let's mention your wife, because I feel like you guys are an interesting duo, and she's an incredible filmmaker too. And where was her documentary that she spent some time? Was she in Africa or something?
It was actually in Bulgaria. She went to I'll say it's a really fantastic documentary called Welcome Nowhere. She filmed with a group of Roma, or more commonly known as gypsies. There were a group of people that basically had they've been living on this piece of land that in Eastern Europe, and they basically were told by the government, like, you know, we're using this land for other stuff. And even though they had been living there sort of illegally, they've been living there for like many, many, many years.
Right.
So the government took them and put them in these train boxcars, like literal just shells, you know, of boxcars, and said, you know, you'll live here, you know, for 6 months, and then we'll find you some new land where you can like have like the houses that you had actually built on this land. Like you can build new houses or whatever. Her documentary sort of starts 10 years after that promise has been made, and they're still living there, and nothing has been done.
That's crazy.
And so, yeah, so she filmed, you know, in that, with that community, talking to those people and hearing their struggles, and it's a heartbreaking story, not only because of their specific situation, but because of all of the situation for the Roma people.
Yeah.
And so she got Ethan Hawke to narrate it.
That's crazy.
Ethan Hawke's like a big hero of mine.
Yeah, that's dope.
And it was really cool that his mother's actually really big in that specific world of the Roma people. So she found out about the project, and she convinced her son to do the narration, which was really great.
That's nuts. Well, I need to get her on this podcast too.
Yeah, she
awesome.
just
hit me up, said she started doing some freelance stuff. So
yeah, we just had a baby, so you know she was working for many years in the making like Blu-ray special features and promo spots and stuff like that for movies, and now she's gone. You know, it's just like that requires so much of you in terms of like you know. So now that we have a kid, she's trying to do something that requires a little bit less.
Right.
So that's it's been a wild ride having a kid. He just
I can only imagine. Everyone that I know that's been having children lately, I just did a little bit of babysitting the other day, which was tight. My friend had a kid, and she was just working late till like 5 a.m, so we just watched the kid until then. And it was basically Lauren watching the kid, but I was there, and it was like impossible to sleep. Like I would fall asleep and then just be like, why don't I hear anything? Or what is that noise? Or what, you know what I mean? It was terrifying. I went up like 18 times. She was so mad at me, like, for waking her up so much. She's like, it's not, trust me, this isn't a thing. Like, it's fine.
Did the first, like, I would say at least 3 months of my child's like life, I just spent staring at him like some sort of creepy character in a horror movie, just staring down while he slept, just being like, is he breathing?
Right.
Shake him, make sure he's breathing, you know?
It's terrifying.
Yeah, for sure. Well, especially because they're so fragile.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, we had to hold the neck, and I'm just like, fuck, they're like little hairless birds or something, and you just think like, oh, you know, and it's terrifying, and you just realize sort of how much you take your, you know, things like the ability to stub your toe and walk it off for granted, you know, and just the idea that like these creatures, like they're constantly at risk, you know. It's so fucking crazy. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
Thank you. It's funny because, you know, a lot of people have asked me like, what's the difference between your first book and your second book? Because I have 2 books, and my second one just came out. And my first book, I always think, is kind of like the ideas and notions of a guy in his 20s, and the messages that he feels he needs to get out to the world, and the messages that he wants to communicate. And this book is sort of a collection of stuff now that I'm in my 30s. That's like, these are the messages that I've learned after years. It's like, you know, to some degree, there's like the don't give up idea still has a lot of value to me, but I think it's important to have some nuance with that, where you could say, okay, it's not just about don't give up, because I think especially in LA, people can get like caught up in this, like, I can't pivot to anything else because that's giving up, that's quitting. Right. And sometimes it's like, you can realize I'm chasing the wrong destiny. This is not actually what I feel that, like, you can get like an acting job and realize like, oh, this kind of sucks. Yeah. I don't really like this. Right. You know, like, I mean, you know, you think to yourself like about all the musicians that like get the success they want and then like realize they're miserable or whatever, you know. And so, you know, for me, I think like you can even experience that, you know, on a smaller scale. So, you know, for me, I think it's important to not just say don't give up. It's also a matter of like, find out why you're chasing this and figure out if there's another way of getting what you want. Like for me, not to say that I've completely given up on the idea of screenwriting, but for me, what I really wanted was to reach people and to feel a connection. And I was trying to do that with screenwriting, and I realized I can kind of do this in a more immediate way by literally just putting a piece of artwork into their lives.
Yeah.
Instead of inviting them to come into the movie theater and see my, artwork, I'm bringing the movie theater to them essentially and saying like, hey, you just walked by this piece of art. This is for you. Thank you for checking it out. I hope you get something from it. And so I feel like more people can learn from that, hopefully, and say, wow, so what I came out here thinking that I wanted to be an actor, but what I really wanted to do was just feel like I'm expressing myself and living amongst different things. And so, is there another way of doing that where I'm not forced to do it by this sort of rigid structure I've set up in my own mind? You know? So I think that's what this second book is about, is finding the nuance within that. And I think then, if I ever do a third book, or if anybody ever wants to publish a third book, who knows, it'll probably be like the 40s, and within that, I think fatherhood will probably be a big part of it, and
Totally.
I think my artwork from now on is probably going to be pretty well informed by, these are the messages that I, I'm sort of looking at my art as somewhat of a legacy for the next one. And, I mentioned my middle name is Morley, and so my son's middle name is Morley as well.
That's dope.
And so, who knows if he'll, pick up the reins and see what, he has to say to the world.
Wow, that's insane. What if he becomes like a poster policeman where he like just goes around and tears down posters and he just hates?
That would be awful, but I think at the same time, I think, if I can inspire passion in any way, shape, or form,
Yeah. No, that's going to be awesome. It's such a timepiece, you know what I mean? Like, to clearly just like how you just said, you're just bookmarking points in your life and being able to show it off. I think that's so cool.
Thanks.
Shit, this was a good podcast, man.
Thanks. But I feel bad we only answered one person's question.
Don't worry about it. It's all good. There's so many more, but I look over them and I can tell we've already answered them suitably throughout the thing. Cool. It always happens. I just never get a chance to read them before.
Should you just read more names so that they can feel like they're heard?
It was Nikos, Dave. They know.
Okay, cool.
They know. They're the homies. They're always like, there's always some people that always ask questions.
Okay.
And they're just always getting them. So like I said, I put it in the group, and sometimes I'll post and I'll get like 50 comments, and then sometimes I'll post it and it'll get like one just because it gets buried in like the feed. But new website, we're working on it, trying to find new ways to make this happen, So
yeah.
If people got this far into the podcast and listen to it, I want them to go, this is what I always tell them to do. Go to your Instagram.
Okay.
And go to the most recent post, whatever it is at the time they're listening to this, and tag me at Ben Reverse World. So just if you don't know my Instagram, tag me and then put your hashtag, whatever hashtag you choose, so that we both know that they listen to this podcast like all the way through, because only they have to listen to it to know whatever hashtag you're about to say.
So I say the hashtag.
You say the hashtag, whatever you want. Sometimes they can be anything you want. But don't put like Morley, because like so many people probably have said that.
Sure. Let's go with hashtag Grande.
Grande?
Coffee.
Okay. All
or
right.
were you thinking like Ariana Grande?
Yeah, I don't know why I thought that.
Maybe we should go with hashtag.
No, you can do Grande. Okay. That's fine.
But we're talking Grande.
Coffee.
Grande coffee,
cool.
not Grande.
Yeah, it's related.
Not Ariana.
Which is ironic because he doesn't drink coffee, so that's nice.
That's true. I don't drink coffee. Yeah, straight edge.
Yeah, that was great, man. So buying the books, how do people do that?
You can buy the book either by just going to morleybook.com, and that'll have a link, or you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it in cool bookstores. It's always great if you can go to a local bookstore, an independent bookstore. That's always awesome.
Is there like a list of the store somewhere?
There's not. I just mean like if you wherever you are, instead of going to Barnes and Noble, you can go to whatever bookstore is not a Barnes and Noble basically, exactly. or an Amazon Books or whatever. And if they don't carry it, most bookstores should, but if they don't, they can also order it for you, and that way you can support a local business.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want people to know?
Jeez. Be kind to each other. That's the main. That's the one. Thing I always try to write whenever I'm, signing something, is I always just say, stay kind, because to me, I think, kindness is the most important, quality that's valued the least.
Yeah.
It's
totally
more important than almost anything else. So kindness and courage.
I love it. All right, cool. How do you want to end this?
I don't know. High five or something.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Thanks, man. Bow, 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 bow. That was it for episode 63 with Morley. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Make sure to follow Morley on Instagram at @official_Morley so you can start fucking with what he's doing. Make sure to leave a review on iTunes, YouTube, wherever you're listening to this shit, so people know that we're tight as fuck. We appreciate any feedback that you guys give us. Again, if you love this podcast and you love the private community, pop over to our merch store and grab some gear. We really appreciate that shit. Shop BWNC.com. And if you want a discount code, we give codes out to our Patreon supporters along with other exclusive offers. So patreon.com/blackwithnocream. Join the Patreon army. Speaking of our Patreon supporters, shout out to our top tier supporters right now, aka our OU Rich producers of the show, Aisha and Reed, and the OU Rich producer, my fucking boy, Craig. Y'all are lit forever. We appreciate you. Subscribe to Black with No Cream on every platform of your choosing. New episodes every single Wednesday and Sunday. I will see you next week, you bitch!